ayes. The bills for final consideration do pass. Tonight, there will be a 1-hour courtesy public hearing on Council Bill 171, approving a proposed contract to exchange property between the City and County of Denver and School District Number 1 in the City and County of Denver and the State of Colorado, DPS, to exchange property which DPS owns located at 1330 Fox Street and land which the City owns approximately located at the intersection of East Girard Street and South Havana Street. Anyone wishing to speak on this matter must see the Council Secretary to receive a speaker card to fill out and return to her during the recess of Council. As you can see, the Secretary will have some help in taking your cards. We will probably take a longish recess, 25 or 30 minutes, because we want to be sure to be able to organize all of the speakers' cards, because we will be having the pros, cons, speaking before us. So it'll be a little bit longer recess than we're used to. But at this time, if there are no objections from members of council, we'll start the recess.
Coverage of this week's Denver City Council meeting will resume once members have signed proposed legislation out of committees. Next on the agenda is the final approval of ordinances which may include public hearings. Here again are highlights of what's on the docket for this meeting.
There's one public hearing on this agenda. Council Bill 171 is a 1-hour courtesy public hearing on property exchange between Denver and Denver Public Schools.
Action on this agenda is just ahead. Before bills come to this meeting, they pass through the various council committees. Denver 8 also keeps its focus on these committees with weekly meeting coverage. Let's take a look at this week's schedule.
Council is reconvened. If I could have everybody take your seats, please, and get ready for the public hearing. have one public hearing this evening. I think you all knew that. This is a 1-hour courtesy public hearing. Speakers should begin their remarks by telling the council their names and cities of residence, and if you feel comfortable doing so, your home address. If you are here to answer questions only, when your name is called, come to the podium, state your name, and note that you are available for questions of council. Each speaker will have 3 minutes. There will be no yielding of time. On the presentation monitor on the wall, when the yellow light comes on, it tells you you have 30 seconds to conclude your remarks. And when the red light appears, your time is up. I know that when you get to talking, I've done this myself, you don't quite notice the monitor and the 30 seconds, but I will be sure to let you know when your time is up. We don't want to go over time because we're going to try to get as many different speakers speaking in the hour that we have allotted. So when you go over time, you use up the time of the whole hearing. Just want to let you know that. But I will be sure to let you, I won't tell you at the 30 seconds, but I will tell you at the 3-minute time. Since the hearing is confined to 1 hour, council will only be able to hear 10 speakers in favor of the bill and 10 speakers opposed to the bill. We usually do this. We have people speaking in favor and people speaking opposed. However, please note that we would have the opportunity to hear more testimony if each speaker does not use the full 3 minutes allotted. I do want to announce, since we won't be able to have time for all the speakers, that we have 42 people who have signed up to speak, and of those, 15 are in favor and 27 are opposed, just to make sure that people realize that your time, if you don't get to speak, at least we know what the difference was between those approved and opposed. Speakers must stay on the topic of the hearing and must direct their comments to the council. Speakers are prohibited from using profanity or making personal attacks during their comments. This is strictly adhered to. This is a deliberative body who expects civility from themselves and from our visitors and our constituents. Audience members, please understand that council members use electronic devices of various kinds to access the materials relevant to the public hearings before us. Be assured, however, that by mutual agreement and common practice of this City Council, these devices are not being used for texting, emailing, or other communications during public meetings. We will put the bill up, we will open it for comments, and then we will ask for the staff report first, and then we will begin the public hearing. Councilwoman Fotz, will you please put Council Bill 171 on the floor for final passage?
Thank you, Madam President. I move that Council Bill 171 be placed upon final consideration and do pass.
It has been moved and seconded. We move to the comment period. The public hearing for Council Bill 171 is open. May we please have the staff report? Mr. Steinberg?
Good evening, council members. Bill 171 is seeking approval of a purchase and sale agreement between Denver Public Schools and the City and County of Denver. Denver Public Schools will be contributing a 46,000 square foot building located at 1330 Fox in exchange for 11.5 acres of land that the city owns at Hampton Girard and Havana, excuse me. Of the 11 acres, 2.5 of it is a parking lot, and 9 acres of it is land that has been de-designated, and it's now part of the city's real estate portfolio. The terms of the agreement will have a restrictive covenant as part of the transaction where DPS agrees that the property will be used for a minimum of 40 years for a educational facility. And if after that period of 40 years there's a transaction to sell, the City and County of Denver has a right of first refusal for any offers that come in. The appraised prices of the two respective properties has a $705,000 difference in favor of DPS, and the City and County of Denver will be paying that in two fashions. One is by the Domestic Violence Center private funding, which will pay $355,000 of that, and then the balance of $350,000 will be paid by the City and County of Denver at the point in time that we take a certificate of occupancy. Renovations, again, for the building will be funded through private fundraising, and DPS will oversee the improvements that are going to be done to the building. Additionally, at the end of the presentations, for any questions that council members have, we have representatives here from DPS, from Parks and Rec, from the Domestic Violence Center, and from the District Attorney's Office.
Thank you, Mr. Steinberg. One of the ways we can do this to speed up the process, or at least get as many people in as much as we can, is to ask 5 people at a time to come up to this front pew, and I'll call those 5 and then ask you in the order in which you appear on my list here. So I'm going to call the first 5 people up who have signed up, and they are Bill Mcmullen, Mary Ewing, Jim Grazer, Brad Cameron, and Linda Johnston. Please make your way up to this front pew so you can be on deck for your presentation. And our first speaker will be Bill Mcmullen. So you can make your way to the podium, Mr. Mcmullen. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam President and Council. And my name is Bill Mcmullen, and I've been in Denver since 1966. I grew up in North Denver. I went to Alcott, Skinner, North High School. For the last 20 years, I've lived out in Southeast Denver at 9105 East Lehigh, unit number 53, Denver, Colorado, 80237. I've done a couple things in my life. One, I've run a business downtown for 32 years. I've been on the Board of Adjustment for Zoning for 5 years. And then I've been on the RTD board for 8 years. But what brings me here tonight is to speak out in favor of this elementary school in my neighborhood. It desperately needs one. The elementary schools in Southeast Denver are at capacity, and my neighbors and my tenants would like to have a place for their kids to go to school. And as an investor, I listen to my tenants, and they're telling me they're going to move. They're telling me that their kids are going to first grade in a classroom with 30 other students. Now, that's not fair. And out in Southeast Denver, this is a perfect location. I have gone and walked the property. I've been all around it. And you have to realize in Southeast Denver, Denver goes all the way to Peoria. That's another mile to the east of Havana. Another mile to the west is the first neighborhood school. So in my neighborhood, the kids don't have a walkable school. And I think that's so important. And this is a perfect piece of property that can be developed. And I remember as a kid, I went to Ballarat, the Denver Public Schools, up in the hills. This could be a Ballarat in the city. Down along that, the Cherry Creek, the educational opportunities will be extensive. So I would urge you to vote for this for many reasons. Oh, I got one more reason. The mass transit. This site has 2 bus routes, the 35 and the 105. They're already established. And I can tell you from my 8 years on RTD how many schools were fighting over getting access to public transit. So I hope I got my points out. And how much time I got?
You have 30 seconds.
I'll give it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mcmullen. Mary Ewing.
Council members, Mary Ewing, 720 Gilpin Street, Denver, Colorado, 80218. I am the representative from District 10 to the Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, and I am also the longest-serving member of the Advisory Board. In September of 2007, The advisory board unanimously voted to support the designation of the Hentzell Park Natural Area because, and I quote Susan Baird, the author of the game plan, which was adopted in April of 2003 as a supplement to the Denver Comprehensive Plan of 2000. Denver residents want more bits of wilderness close to home. Like people in other cities, Denverites are beginning to define public parks differently, no longer regarding remnant natural areas as left behind, cast-off lands, but as important, enriching places for people and wildlife. Susan Baird had the vision almost a decade ago to set our city on the right path to achieving the distinction of being a city in a park. Denver city government has a long history of stewardship of dedicated parkland and designated open space. From years of polling, we all know the importance of parkland ranks at the top for Denver residents. The 2007 Parks and Rec Advisory Board made the decision to support preservation of this remnant piece of land that was slated to be restored as a living legacy of what our environment looked like when Denver was settled. All board members, the parks manager, the mayor, and assuredly city council members at that time knew that we were voting on what Susan Baird called the long view. We voted for the future of this land in our city, and I stand before you tonight to tell you that those agreements should continue to be honored. This piece of unique land should be restored and the excuses of financial constraints be tossed aside. Since 2007, it has sat in abandonment until our elected and appointed officials of today decided to steal it from the citizens of Denver. They will gas the creatures on and under the ground. They will starve out the dependent wildlife. They will bulldoze the contours of the land that so clearly reflect the natural flow of Cherry Creek. And they will build over the bones and artifacts of the Native Americans and the bison that they hunted for food. At the December 13th, 2012 advisory meeting, I put forth the motion to uphold the advisory board's original designation of Hentzell Park Natural Area. The vote was 11-6. Strangely, the recorded transcript of that meeting is missing, and I assure you that your representatives' voices were clear and courageous. As elected and appointed officials, you have an obligation to protect the public trust and the public assets. You have an obligation to conduct public business in a transparent manner. I encourage you to do the right thing tonight and turn this proposal down. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ewing. Jim Grazer.
Hello, my name is Jim Grazer. I live at 3124 South Elmira Street, approximately 1.2 miles away, actually, about 3/4 of a mile away from the site. I'm actually here to speak on behalf of my daughter, Cora Grazer, who's 9 weeks old and obviously unable to speak. But we hope that she will be one of the first students at this location. So I'll read a statement on her behalf. As residents of the Hampton Heights neighborhood, we want to inform the City Council that our family firmly supports the proposed land exchange to Denver Public Schools. The proposed land exchange is a near-perfect solution to the abandoned property near our home. Today, the proposed site for the public school is an unused parking lot, a drainage ditch, and a scrap, barren land. This is not a recreation area. This is not a natural area. In fact, this is a site that is a classic example of urban neglect and a potential brownfield redevelopment. The graffiti on the broken fence must no longer be the de facto welcome sign to Denver. Our neighborhood deserves this site to be rehabilitated. The proposed Denver Public School would be a welcome change. We presently have no schools within walking distance. As a result, our aging neighborhood is slowly declining because new families are not attracted to the area. Without new families, our local businesses are closing and the crime rate appears to be rising. The easy solution for families in the Hampton Heights neighborhood is a for sale sign in the front yard. But the families in the apartment buildings have fewer options. They struggle to succeed without nearby services for their children. Our neighborhood would strongly support a new elementary school. At a personal level, my family's future in Denver is dependent upon this proposal. We are supporters of early childhood education and neighborhood public schools. It's difficult to see why we would raise our daughter in this community without a proper school. Finally, we understand this land swap has generated some controversy. I'd like the council to know, please know that we have seen no evidence of controversy within our neighborhood. The common belief is that the long overdue school will finally be built sometime in the near future. So frankly, it's disappointing to find this project has actually been delayed. Please remember this issue is not as complicated as it seems. It's simply an abandoned property versus a potential elementary school. The council is lucky to have such an easy decision. Approving the land exchange is a rare point of common sense in city politics. Please don't miss this opportunity. I urge you to vote for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Grazer. Brad Cameron.
My name is Brad Cameron. I live at 1200 Humboldt Street here in Denver. Not terribly close to the property, but for over about 25 years I've been riding on the Cherry Creek bike path. During that time I've often stopped at this area, watched the prairie dog town. And I do think I need to stress, this isn't a blighted area, it's a prairie dog town. It's a significant natural habitat in Denver. Bottom line is I think this is a very bad idea and I would urge council not to approve it. Our parks should not be cannibalized, and certainly not in this fashion. I think it's almost shameful that we have both advocates for parks, advocates for schools, and advocates against domestic violence that are here more or less in contention. We all, I think, agree that these are great things, and a smart city should be able to figure out how to accommodate all of them. But enough in generalities. I specifically want to talk about some of the mitigation properties that were cited in Lori Dannenmiller's January 2nd approval letter. Those are at Heron Pond, Montbello, and Lowry Stapleton. Now, legitimate mitigation should involve projects that are initiated in response to a loss, not going back and claiming in the past for good deeds, and also should involve some comparable quality property. None of these so-called mitigation properties meet those criteria. We did an open records request to get a better understanding of them, and of the three, I want to talk first about Montbello. That involves a deal with the Environmental Learning for Kids program. It's been in the works since at least 2010, way before this proposal surfaced. It's currently a vacant lot, not anything comparable to the natural habitat at Hentzell. And when it's finally done, it'll be the site of ELK's office, and primarily is going to be used by that facility. It's not a good comparable mitigation. Heron Pond is equally of the same. It is quite literally an industrial wasteland at this point in time. And it's already owned by the city and adjacent to Northside Park, but the plans of the city is that it's primarily going to be used as a regional stormwater detention facility. Not much mitigation there. And then finally, the additional parkland at Lowry and Stapleton, it seems rather obvious. We're putting tens of thousands of new residents in there, and we need more parks for those residents. These are parks that were included in the development plans for both Lowry and Stapleton, and in no way should they be mitigation property for the taking of the parkland at Hentzell. The bottom line is there really is no mitigation that's being offered for this property that's being taken, and I would very much urge council to vote no. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cameron. I'll call Linda Johnston, and while she is making her way to the podium, I'd like to call up Jim Haney, Marvin Flom, Ann Rowe, Zelda Hawkins, and Jeff Shoemaker to please make your way up to the pew here. John Case. Did I miss John Case? You did. Oh, I'm sorry. I looked for that last person. Do you mind waiting until we hear from Mr. Case? It's my mistake. Mr. Case, come on up.
Well, it's Linda Johnston
It's
first.
Linda Johnston now? What did I do wrong?
After Linda, you said Jim Haney.
Oh, I'm sorry. John, I'm so sorry. I meant to call you up for the 5 and have Linda Johnston is next, and you're up in the next 5. Okay. Is that correct? Do I have that correct? So sorry. Now, Linda.
Thank you, Madam President.
I hope I won't be as awkward as we go forward.
My name is Linda Johnston, and I live in City Council District 6. I'm here to encourage your support of the land exchange involving DPS and the creation of the Rose Andom Center. It was great to hear you talking about child abuse prevention tonight, because the link between child abuse and domestic violence is quite clear. I'm the parent of 2 DPS students. We spend a lot of time in Denver parks. We enjoy being outdoors together. We play a lot of soccer and baseball on the park fields, and we appreciate that Denver offers so many places to be outdoors in the city. I'm also an attorney that has worked on domestic violence in Denver for the past 20 years. I have worked with many victims as they try to sort through the numerous agencies that have entered their lives due to abuse and try to make sense of the resources that are available but scattered throughout the city. I currently provide training throughout Colorado on developing a coordinated community response to domestic violence, and I talk often about the model that Denver provides in terms of a coordinated response to domestic violence. And the Rose Andom Center is an example of best practices in this field. The land exchange is clearly in the best interest of students and the community. A new school in a good location and a domestic violence center that is conveniently located is the type of progress that we need to serve families and make Denver safer for all residents. Many of the people that will be seeking services at the center are not in a position to enjoy Denver parks or take advantage of Denver schools. They are simply focused on safety and survival. The Rose Andom Center will provide one place where victims and their children can get the information and support that they need to rebuild their lives. The center is a great example of how collaboration can work to make victims safer and intervention more effective. Denver is in the position to implement best practices for education and domestic violence response. I hope you will support this important land exchange. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnston. Now, Mr. Case, sometimes that top name disappears from me, but you are up next. Thank you very much.
My name's John Case. I live at 10081 East Cornell Avenue in Denver. That's in Hampton Heights. I've lived in that home since 1978, and it's my first city council meeting, so it's nice to be here with you. I want to show you a picture of this land that's involved here. I took this. I took this picture a week ago yesterday when I was out cross-country skiing on this piece of ground. And you can see a few prairie dog mounds here. This is the footbridge that crosses Cherry Creek. Cherry Creek runs along here, along this tree line. And if you look straight north up to this clock tower building, you can, that is about where the city property ends. Paul Hentzell Park runs up to there, and then Babillard Park is beyond that. My wife and I were raised 4 children in this area. They all played in this field. My middle son found a bison jawbone and arrowheads in the Cherry Creek bed. All of my kids saw fox, deer, coyotes, raccoons, skunks, bull snakes, deer, hawks, owls, herons, all kinds of bird life, and they collected all kinds of bugs. This area is unique, and I'm here because I don't see why this has to be a win-lose situation. There's 3 basic interest groups that are involved in this decision. One are the proponents of a domestic violence center. None of us here opposing this land transfer object to a domestic violence center. We're in favor of it. The other is Denver Public Schools. They want to build another school in southeast Denver, and none of us oppose that. We just oppose it at this location because of the unique nature of the land. And there are other good building sites for DPS in southeast Denver. One is at home, where my kids walked to school from our house, and Hamilton's on the same campus. There's probably more land available on that campus than there is in this wildlife area that you're about to vote on. So I think that a deal could be worked out where everybody wins and one of the parties that's interested does not lose. But just to protect ourselves, this afternoon we gave notice to the city attorney's office that if this land is transferred, we intend to file a citizen petition initiative, and if the vote goes against us tonight, possibly a referendum to reverse the vote of the city council.
Mr. Case, thank you very much for your comments and your picture. Mr. Jim Haney.
Good evening. My name's Jim Haney. I'm a lieutenant on the Denver Police Department. I'm currently assigned to the Major Crimes Division, and the reason I want to speak tonight is on behalf of one of the units under my command, the Domestic Violence Unit. The Denver Police Department and the Domestic Violence Unit strive to deliver the best services possible to the victims of domestic violence. In January of 2006, the Domestic Violence Unit became a partner of the Triage Review Team. This team represents a collaboration of various law enforcement agencies and community partners, working to ensure that domestic violence victims receive the services they require as quickly as possible. This team has a strong working relationship, and I believe that the next step in our evolution is the opening of the Rose Andom Center. Having a single place where a victim can come for most, if not all, of their needs reassures them that people really do care. The 1330 Fox Street building is the perfect location for this. Its proximity to the jail, to Denver Police Department headquarters, and the courts make it ideal. In conclusion, the Denver Police Department is very excited to be a partner in this project, and I believe the first step was the Triage Review Team, and I believe the next step is the opening of the Rose Andom Center. Thank you very much for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Haney. Marvin Flom.
Madam President, council members, my name is Marvin Flom. I live at 2770 South Elmira Street in Denver. That's in a complex called the Park at Woodstream Village. And I recently purchased a property there that's adjacent to Cherry Creek and Hentzell Park. Our primary reasons for locating there were quiet neighborhoods, natural settings, abundant open space, and easy access to nature and bicycle trails. When we first started looking for property in that area, we felt that that neighborhood was unique to all of Denver. To allow any kind of development, even a school, would detract from that setting. In fact, we feel that if the council should allow any development of that property, it would be no different than Mayor Bloomberg selling off City Park to the Donald Trumps of the world so they could build more skyscrapers. The citizens of New York City would never allow that to happen, and I don't think it should be allowed to happen in Denver either. I urge you all to vote no on this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Flom. Ann Rowe.
Thank you, Madam President, City Council members. I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. I'm Ann Rowe, and I'm actually a native of Denver, Colorado, and have had the privilege of living in Southeast Denver for the last 25 years, currently at 3220 South Monroe Street, 80210. I am also a member of the DPS Board of Education representing Southeast Denver. At our Board of Education meeting on March 21st, we approved this transaction to move forward. And this was the result of a culmination of a process that began almost a year ago. And it began as we were looking toward issuing a bond in the mill to the citizens of Denver with regard to moving forward with Denver Public Schools. And with regard to that, we were looking at areas of growth. And what we discovered in Southeast Denver is we are in desperate need of elementary seats to serve our students. I have the honor and the privilege of spending time in these schools, and I've spent time at Home, Bradley, Samuels, and Southmore, all of which are either at or over capacity. Home is in a situation right now where they have to send their fifth grade students up to Hamilton. Both Southmore and Samuels have mobile units. All of these schools are making incredible effort to do the best they can, but it is very difficult, and what we need to do is give these schools the opportunity to create their environment and also serve the kids in Southeast Denver. The Citizens Committee that was created around the bond in the mill looked at this situation, and when the opportunity came up with the possible swap with the city with regard to the Fox Street location for the Domestic Violence Center and the opportunity to build a school at Hentzell Park. School board members actually went out last July and were able to see this property. Since then, I have actually walked the Hampton Heights neighborhood prior to the bond to let them know this was a possibility. We've also had a number of public meetings, both within the neighborhood, within Parks and Rec, where folks have been given the opportunity to share their thoughts with regard to this. The reason the Board of Education moved this forward was because of opportunity, an opportunity for our city to serve our kids, to serve citizens who are suffering from domestic violence, and to actually enhance open space. We looked at the half, that the glass is half full, the opportunity here, and we hope you consider this because I think there's great potential for our youngest citizens and the citizens of Denver. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Rowe. Ms. Zelda Hawkins.
Thank you. My name is Zelda Hawkins. I live in Hampton Heights, 3319 South Galena Court. I'm speaking tonight for myself and on behalf of many of my neighbors. We're very much opposed to the proposed land swap and building of an elementary school on the Hentzell Park open space. We're not only against the land swap, but are very angry at the way the city has handled it. We've contacted our city council members, and our letters have either been ignored or answered with a form letter that is full of government doublespeak and doesn't address our concerns. The Hentzell Park open space is an oasis of natural beauty within the city, one of the few places where we can see what the land was like before civilization encroached on it. The open space provides sanctuary and solace to both humans and animals, something that is in increasingly short supply these days. Part of the parkland that would be lost in the land swap includes remnants of native prairie vegetation, some of the best to survive within the city. The Denver Department of Parks and Rec is well aware of this, but chooses to discount its value. The land swap would set an unacceptable precedent that could ultimately erode both the size and quality of Denver parkland and open space. The Parks and Rec Advisory Board voted overwhelmingly against de-designating the land, a decision that was disregarded and unilaterally overturned by the manager, a mayoral appointee, in an act that smacks of cronyism. In fact, the stench you might smell in this room tonight came from the smoke-filled room where this deal was made and apparently finalized before it was ever brought before the general public. The lack of communication between the city, the school board, and the residents has been quite simply appalling. Public meetings were not advertised. The original amount of land involved was 5.7 acres, not the 11.7 being discussed tonight. The proposed Family Violence Center had already obtained a lease from DPS for the use of the Fox Street building before the plan was announced or any public comment solicited. I know that the city and city council has a responsibility to plan for the future of the city and county of Denver, but it has an even greater responsibility to the current residents not to take away open space to build an elementary school. Educating children and helping victims of domestic violence are important, but raping and defiling the land are not the ways to do it. I'd like to close by paraphrasing the singer Joni Mitchell. Don't it always seem to go? You don't know what you've got till it's gone. Pave paradise, put up an elementary school. Thank you all for listening tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Hawkins. Mr. Jeff Shoemaker, and as he's coming up, let me call the next five, but let me make sure that Dan Rivkin is at the top. Is that the first one? I'd like to call Dan Rivkin, Stacey Clark, Renee Lewis, Susie Street, and Dave Felice to please come up to the on-deck pew. And you may begin, Mr. Shoemaker.
Thank you, Madam President and members of Council. Thank you for letting me address you tonight. And I also want to thank you again for the honor that you bestowed upon my father several weeks ago. My name is Jeff Shoemaker. I live at 3456 East Cornell, 80210 in the Welsher neighborhood. I'm also the director of the Greenway Foundation, and we're proud that over the last 39 years, we've been a partner in providing over $100 million of recreational, environmental, and water quality improvements to our urban waterways, the South Platte River and its tributaries, and that in turn has spawned over $10 billion of economic impact to our city. I am here today speaking in support of this measure. I realize the significance of this measure, and I applaud all those, regardless of their side on this or their opinion on this matter, for standing up tonight and speaking their hearts, because that is what makes Denver the great city that it is. Denver is growing. Isn't that exciting? In fact, the problem that we have today versus 20 years ago is people are moving into Denver to go to Denver public schools. I was in the legislature from 1986 to 1992. Our problem is how do we keep kids from moving out of Denver? And in fact, along with Ann Rowe and Kendra Black and others, I'm very proud to have been a part of reopening Slavin School, which had been closed for 15 years for the realities of that time. And today, it's one of the finest schools in Denver. I grew up in the Welsher neighborhood. I lived along the golf course. I understand the value of schools. I'm a former public school teacher. I'm a graduate of DPS. I went to TJ High School 1,000 years ago, and I represented the city in Southeast Denver 500 years ago. I understand what we're talking about here, as well as any one individual can. This is a balanced approach. It addresses the need to have additional desk space and kid space for kids that want to come in and stay in this town. It addresses the need for supporting the victims of domestic violence. It allows for a school to focus on environmental education. And by the way, our program, SPRE, South Platte River Environmental Education, has received, and I say this with great pride, more environmental education awards than any other program in the state of Colorado. And we take thousands and thousands of kids down on Cherry Creek, down on the South Platte River, down on its tributaries every year, and we would be proud to be part of creating the environmental education program that this school can focus on. I also understand that Councilwoman Lehman is going to carry an ordinance that will make sure that the remaining acres of Hentzell Park are designated park space. This must happen. This should happen. This needs to happen. And finally, let us not question for a minute this administration's support and belief in an advocacy for park and open space in this city. I take personal exception to any comments that speak to that. And let me tell you why it's close to my heart. In the next 2 years and 2 months, over $15 million of additional park, open space, trail, water quality, and natural areas will be along the river and its tributaries. And then we're going to talk about Sun Valley after that. And then we're going to talk about River North and National Western Stock Show after that. So this is a difficult decision. It's a challenging decision. And with that, I'm at 3 minutes and 6 seconds, and so I'll stop and tell you all thank you for the opportunity to speak to you, and I applaud your service to our city and its citizens. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shoemaker. Dan Rivkin.
Dan Rivkin, Platt Park, longtime Denver resident, retired government manager. I've heard from a couple of city council representatives that there's a certain amount of council privilege given to the council person in the district the project is located. Instead of deferring to supporting an action in full or part due to this questionable project, I would ask you to consider the following points, also prior made somewhat. There's a large public sentiment against this swap, and none of the people I know are against the need for a school or a women's center. It just doesn't have to be at the cost of destroying a last great natural area in Denver with important flora and fauna. I would say that in this crowd, if you would like to stand, there's an overwhelming number of people that are in agreement with me. It should not be skewed to look like we have equal representation for comments here. Thank you. We recognize that destroying this designated unique natural area is not the right solution. This was also confirmed at the recent Denver Parks and Recs Advisory Board meeting, where a majority vote affirmed the original unanimous vote that designated this area based on long-term environmental study. At the recent Democratic district meeting in Peggy Lehman's own district, there was overwhelming opposition to this swap. Walk through this natural area and enjoy it, as I hope you will, or before it may be gone, unfortunately. And you will be aware that you are surely to see prairie dogs that are about to be inhumanely poisoned and other flora and fauna destroyed. Ask the hard questions about this deal, such as if this is an appropriate site for the school, given its location right off busy Havana and in a floodplain, or in terms of a lack of current concerted efforts to identify better sites for this, which could resolve it for all three constituencies. I respectfully submit to you that this swap is in the opposite of some's contention of being a long-term interest to the city. It is in fact short-sighted and lacks any bigger vision for our future residents to enjoy a disappearing part of our natural heritage. Forever cannot be replaced, but a school can be built elsewhere. Finally, at a minimum, please defer your vote until an exploratory committee of some kind can see really if there are other alternatives to destroying this natural area filled with wildlife. Surely there are other solutions that could meet everyone's concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rivkin. Stacey Clark.
Thank you, Madam President and members of the Council. My name is Stacey Clark, and I live in Littleton. I'm here in support of the land exchange for the Rose Andom Center. In 2008, my oldest daughter, Tony, was a homicide victim of domestic violence. She was killed on St. Paul Street here in Denver, Colorado. Her case was called one of the most horrible, violent crimes by Judge Mullins, who presided over her case in the 19 years that he sat on the bench. I have tried, after that horrible experience, to offer help and support to many victims of domestic violence. And last year, I was the sole support to a young woman who is trying to leave her abusive husband. She is disabled, cannot drive, and has been isolated from her family. I became everything to her as I tried to help her start a new life away from her husband. I provided transportation, food, and money. I tried to get her into counseling and to apply for services through several agencies, but was unable to drive her to all of these places. Because of my inability to provide her transportation, she did not get the adequate help she needed to recover from her abusive husband. This center will give victims a chance to receive the help they desperately need in so many areas. I am here in tribute to my daughter to help prevent my greatest nightmare from ever becoming anyone else's. I ask that you please support the land exchange for the Rose Andom Center. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Renee Lewis.
Honorable City Councilmen and Councilwomen, my name is Renee Lewis, and I am a resident of the park at Windstream Village, 2770 South Elmira. Hentzell Park is my front yard. Saturday was a beautiful sunshiny day, and I couldn't resist going for a walk. I spent time watching a colorful pair of mallards swimming peacefully in Cherry Creek. I walked along further and was delighted by the chirping sounds of the prairie dog colony, as if they were greeting me, and spent time watching them with fascination as they went about their prairie dog lives. I marveled to discover that the beaver are back. Fresh signs of their presence are everywhere along the creek. Can you imagine a living beaver colony right here in the city? How wondrous. I saw large nests in the trees, and I thought about the owls that I heard this winter and the magical sound of their calls in the night. I thought about how I was blessed to see a huge hawk last week sitting on a tree in a park directly across from my yard, and I stopped my hurried day and just watched and wondered what kind of hawk that could be, and vowed to look for a picture of that hawk so I could learn his name. Have you ever heard a baby coyote making his first yips and howls? It's the cutest thing you've ever heard. Yes, I know there are those that would say these animals are just a nuisance and they stand in the way of progress. But I say to you, there's no greater classroom for a child to experience the wonders of nature than this magical park alongside Cherry Creek. I am asking you as a member of the Hentzell Park community to represent me by doing the right thing. This attempt to take natural spaces and repurpose them for construction projects without public input is completely counter to the spirit of the Denver City Charter 245, which asks for a vote of the people. If this project is truly the right thing to do, I'm sure the people of Denver will vote in the affirmative. If we vote in the affirmative, then the project can move forward in a positive manner. But I think it's highly possible that the Denver public will not vote in the affirmative for this land transfer, thus the need for skullduggery. Silence is power, but not the right kind of power. Yes, you can use the power of office in negative ways, and it's perfectly possible to win the day. But I think that in the end, all things will be revealed. I am asking you to do the right thing and vote no on Mayor Hancock's proposal. Please do not leave this in the hands of backroom politics. Take the politicians' hands out of the treasure chest now before this precedent gets established. Schools can be built in plenty of places, but a park in the highly coveted Cherry Creek corridor can never be replaced. Please don't allow the pirates to take our treasure.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis. Susie Street.
Madam President and City Council members, I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. My name is Susie Street. I live in Southeast Denver at 3962 South Syracuse Way. My two sons have gone to Samuels Elementary, Hamilton, and TJ, and I can tell you that my youngest son was in one of those mobile classrooms at Samuels because of the overcrowding and has had classrooms of 28 to 30 kids. Fortunately, I think he's doing well, but I also know that many of his friends live in the artisan apartments in those complexes off of Girard and in Kennedy Ridge, and they have to travel by bus to get to Samuels, and it's very difficult, and I think having a neighborhood school is really important. The other part that I'd like to speak to is the fact that in my work as a social worker, working at the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless with families, that 85% of the families that we see every day walking through our doors are victims of domestic violence. The largest growing population of homeless people is young children under the age of 5. The families that we see experiencing domestic violence think that once they have come to us and they have fled the situation, that they don't need to deal with it anymore. But in fact, they get onto our properties, into our transitional housing, and they find that they enter into further domestic violence relationships and their children are further traumatized. We try to talk to them about seeking out services in the domestic violence community because we do have a grant working with other agencies like Safe House Denver and Project Safeguard, but they don't want to leave the property. They don't want to go out into the community. They want to settle. And so we're working really hard collaboratively for them to be able to seek those services on property. But if we were able to have a center where we could co-locate and meet with homeless families in the Andom Center, which is what we're seeking, then they would be able to see us and the people from Safe House and the people at the Andom Center, and they wouldn't have to travel from agency to agency or to rely on people like the person who spoke before me who said she spent all of her time trying to transport this woman who was disabled. I ask you to vote affirmatively for this measure. It's important for the children in Denver, for the families, for the victims of domestic violence. I truly enjoy the outdoors. I'm outside a lot. I know there's a lot of parks in Denver. There's a lot of open space, and I don't think that this one parcel of land is going to be the be-all, end-all of having any nature in Denver. I think we have a lot, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Street. Dave Felix, and as he's coming up, I would like to call the next 5 people, which are Gully Stanley, Stephen Wolfstein, Danielle Evans, Kathleen Wells, and Dora Lee Larson.
Good evening, council members. This matter before you is fundamentally about the loss of irreplaceable natural area.
I hate to interrupt you, and we won't count it against you. Would you introduce yourself? Tell you where you're from.
My name is Dave Felice, F-E-L-I-C-E. I live in Park Hill.
Thank you.
As I was saying, this is about fundamentally the loss of irreplaceable natural area and the betrayal of public trust. You should reject this insidious scheme because there are too many misleading and deceptive questions about how the deal was made and how this how much this so-called trade is going to cost. As an example of the confusion, the council bill now describes 11.7 acres when previous discussions have been about 11.5. Why does anyone think it's a good idea to build a school in a floodplain? There are open spaces along South Monaco where even commercial building is prohibited because of potential flooding. Who is actually going to pay for proper drainage at Hentzell Park Natural Area?
When Kelly Lead worked for the school district, why did he decide the natural area was the only site for a school building? Did Lead know that he was going to work for Michael B. Hancock, who wanted the land for a trade? Lead apparently didn't even know the land was designated as a natural area. The Parks Department initially had difficulty describing the land and how much land was to be involved. When did Michael Hancock promise the building for a domestic violence assistance center? According to its own website, the center declared it had secured a lease in October, even before Parks and Recreation Advisory Board considered de-designation. How much is actually going to be spent to renovate a building which School Superintendent Tom Boasberg acknowledges has outlived its usefulness? Who pays if asbestos abatement is required? Why did Boasberg buy 1860 Lincoln even before the deal on 1330 Fox was complete? Did he have some sort of secret assurance from the city administration? The school district's own reports show overcrowding throughout the city. Is there a plan to build more schools in other locations? And does this plan involve taking more parkland? Don't be part of a government whose legacy is the killing of the prairie dogs and the deaths of other animals, the destruction of natural vegetation, and the loss of open space. History is full of stories about someone taking land away from someone else. I urge you to write a better story. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Felice. Gully Stanford.
Madam President, members of Council, my name is Gully Stanford, a Park Hill resident and a member of the 2012 Denver Public Schools Bond and Mill Citizens Planning Advisory Committee, or CPAC. I would like to add my voice to those who are urging you to support the proposed land transaction. First, let me assure you that the CPAC process was open, transparent, and inclusive. Oh, and by the way, smoke-free. To my knowledge, every single person with a point of view on the proposals was afforded ample opportunities to testify. Secondly, I would like to underscore the need for a new school in Southeast Denver. As was shared with the committee, the public, and the DPS board, our Southeast elementary schools are overcrowded and the forecast is for further growth. The other, perhaps surprising trend is towards a broader diversity and greater dependence on free and reduced lunch. Home, for instance, is now 70% minority and 83% free and reduced lunch, indicating the urgent need for a new and accessible facility. Add to that the growing population in the Hampton Heights neighborhood, and the inescapable conclusion is that this is the right time, the right school, and the right location. We can be divided on many things in our community, but we should not be divided on the vital need to invest in the education of the next generation. If we build this school, when we build this school, Southeast Denver will still be beautiful, will still enjoy delightful open spaces, indeed the addition of 16 acres to Hentzell Park, and will still be home to the wonderful flora and fauna so eloquently described by other speakers. But it will also be home to a new generation of Denver residents who will look back as fondly on their 2014 elementary school as others look back on Home, Slavens, or Southmore. You will hear from those, and you have heard from those, who would protect open space even at the expense of providing an accessible education to Denver's expanding population of low-income, first-generation families, of whom 90%, yes, 90% must earn a college certificate or degree, if only to keep up with the needs of our 21st century economy. In an ideal world, yes, we would have boundless open space and excellent schools. But as in any great city, fair compromise allows us, in this case, to meet the needs of our students while preserving the quality of life. Finally, given the obvious need for a domestic violence center, this proposal constitutes a win-win for the city, the schools, our students, and our residents. Please vote yes on Council Bill 171.
Thank you, Mr. Stanford. Stephen Waldston.
Hello, my name is Steve Waldstein. I live in Hampton Heights neighborhood.
approximately 0 feet from the proposed school. It would be literally out my back gate. My family and I have lived there for 14 years in a house that we chose in order to live next to an open space parkland. We chose a quiet neighborhood with open space that we could walk in. It is wrong for you to make a decision which would destroy our neighborhood and take away our lifestyle that we chose, and we chose it based upon city zoning maps showing that this was parkland. I understand that you're trying to balance the needs of different groups, but what you're talking about is destroying the character of a neighborhood. DPS talks about the need for a school, but the vast majority of everyone who has testified at the many different meetings about this proposal have been in opposition. The Park Advisory Board was strongly in opposition. We don't want our neighborhood character drastically changed. We don't want our city to sell parkland, to take away this precious resource that we don't have enough of, and to set a precedent by doing so. I understand that our mayor wants this project to proceed, but the messages which you've been getting and ignoring from the citizens tell a very different story. If you really feel this project is a good idea, then see if the citizens of Denver agree, have a ballot on the issue. There are many other reasons why this is a bad idea. The location is horrible for a school. I mean, one, right next to Cherry Creek is not a very safe place to put a school with young kids. Two, it's in a floodplain, which is quite dangerous. And where is the large cost of rerouting the drainage around the property going to come from? The site is horrible access as far as the traffic flow. It's going to already Girard and Havana at that point are very difficult since it's right where Havana curves and becomes Hampton. And its effect on traffic there will be quite bad. And no serious attempt has ever been made to find a better location for the school. There are many locations that are available in that area. But, you know, I haven't seen any serious effort to do anything about that. You as city council people are entrusted with making decisions that affect the future of our city. It's wrong for you to make a decision that goes against the needs of our city. A location for the domestic violence center can be found without having such negative impact on a neighborhood and without getting rid of an open space park. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wolfstein. Danielle Evans.
My name is Danielle Evans. I'm a citizen of Thornton, but I will withhold my address for, I'll explain here. I'm a survivor of domestic violence and stalking. Multiple cases happened here in Denver County. Denver has an amazing range of services that are available for victims and survivors of domestic violence and stalking. But when you're in the middle of that trauma and trying to get back to work and trying to make court dates and find counseling and seek help, having everything spread all over the city makes it nearly impossible to get all of the help that could help to make the transition much easier. And oftentimes, you know, with my daughter being in school at the time, she was the one who missed a lot of those services. Having everything in one place where we have the opportunity to sit down with victims and say, here is the range of services that are available. Here is the help that you can get in different aspects of your life to move forward in a healthy way, to change cycles that are just going to create healthier children, healthier adults for our community. I think it's just an amazing opportunity. I was extremely humbled to be asked to be part of the programming committee. So I've seen what services are available. I've seen what services I was not able to access because of lack of money, lack of transportation, not being able to get to where I needed to be. So I'd like to ask that you support this land swap. Denver's at the forefront of helping domestic violence, and I'd really like to see us stay that way.
Thank you, Ms. Evans.
Thank you.
Kathleen Wells.
Good evening.
My name is Kathleen Wells. I live at 660 Humboldt Street. I'm speaking on behalf of Advocates for Denver's Urban Parks, a coalition of environmental, neighborhood, and now student groups that have come together to oppose the Hentzell Park land swap. I urge you to do the same. My points are two. A well-known ecologist, Stephen Jones, assessed the ecological value of the 9 acres of the now de-designated natural area. Jones, a co-author of Peterson's Field Guide to the North American Prairie, concluded in the report that you have as follows. Citizens of Denver should be proud of this remarkable prairie preserve. With continued restoration, this park could become one of the finest prairie preserves in all of North America. This position was the position of Denver's Park and Recreation Department, as expressed in their 2007 management plan for this area. Little has changed since that report. Natural areas are not areas one leaves alone. They're areas that are actively managed in order to protect plant communities and wildlife. Although the management plan was never fully implemented, the elements on which it was based remain intact. To the untrained observer, the land may appear blighted, but it contains rare and vital plant and wildlife communities that under proper management could flourish. When the de-designation of the Hentzell Park Natural Area came to the attention of the public in November, a wide range of groups adopted formal position statements in protest, including, but not limited to, the Denver Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, the Audubon Society of Greater Denver, Capitol Hill United Neighborhoods, Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation, Rocky Mountain Chapter of Sierra Club, and on and on. Taken together, these groups represent thousands of Denver citizens. Second, the designation of land contiguous to the Hentzell Park natural area as a Denver park does not make up for the loss. Size matters. The greater number of acres, the greater chance of species survival. The loss of these 9 acres is not trivial, nor is it made up by designating other land as parkland. Doesn't it now seem perverse to teach children about a natural area by destroying it?
Ms. Wells, thank you very much. Doralee Larson.
Council members, thank you for this opportunity. I'm the executive director of the Denver Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, and I've lived in Denver for a long time in District 8, Park Hill, and I love it. I just want to give some perspective on how domestic violence actually impacts our community, especially the adult and child victims of domestic violence. In 2012, almost 2,400 cases of domestic violence were referred to our triage project, which Lieutenant Haney referenced earlier on. We reviewed these cases for risk assessment, victim safety planning, and expedited victim services. In the past 5 years, from 2008 to 2012, at least 28 individuals have died in Denver as a result of domestic violence. Anyone who thinks that domestic violence doesn't affect them could be dead wrong. And startling enough, Denver, with a population of over 620,000 people, has one major agency that deals specifically with services for domestic violence. This is unconscionable. The Andom Center will provide expanded cohesive services in one location to alleviate this lack of services. I mentioned triage as Lieutenant Haney mentioned triage. This is the collaborative model that is part of the infrastructure for the Andom Center. Denver's had a 30-year plus success in creating and refining one of the best community criminal legal system collaborations in the country to respond to domestic violence. We have been invited to showcase our successes to the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Violence Against Women, and the Better Women's Justice Project, just to name a few. The opening of the Andom Center will allow us to take our successes to the next level on behalf of Denver. A core group of advocates, system professionals, and community members have worked on this concept for over 6 years. The major community partners who have been committed to this, to making the Rose Andom Center happen, include the Denver Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, Safe House Denver, Project Safeguard, Project PAVE, Colorado Legal Services, Denver Children's Advocacy Center, Denver Indian Health and Family Services, Servicios de la Raza, and the Dumb Friends League. Newer affiliates include Domestic Violence Initiative, the Rape Assistance and Awareness Program, the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, Center for Work and Education, CWE, in other words, the Colorado Sex Assault and Domestic Violence Center, the Denver Center for Crime Victims, the Mental Health Center, and I could just go on and on and on. But heaven forbid that I should diss our criminal legal system partners, including the city and district attorney's office, especially the district attorney's office, the Denver Police Department Domestic Violence Unit and the Victim Assistance Unit, the Mayor's Office, and Probation. I remember my first visit to the Family Justice Center in San Diego. It was fantastic. We can do it better in Denver. I really urge your support of this transaction. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Larson. If we call the one more speaker, we will have exactly the same number of speakers that are pro and con, and so I will go over the 1 hour time and ask Mr. Jeffrey Washington to please come to the podium.
Good evening. I'm Jeffrey Washington, Metro State University student body president. I live in Denver, and I just want to get it out the way. No one is against supporting women of domestic abuse. I've seen that in my own family, and I know how tragic that is. And no one is against more schools for children. But yesterday was a beautiful Easter Sunday, and many of you took your children, your grandchildren, out to a natural open space and did an Easter egg hunt. I know I experienced that when I was young growing up, and none of us have the right to deny the future generations that experience. Going out, taking part in nature, being able to play in a natural open space is something that children will always remember, because I remember it. And second, and what I think the real issue is, it's hard for me to believe that DPS actually did a thorough review of finding options for students. Because the real issue is growing population. That's something that every growing city faces. And when I looked at the report, I didn't see anything about online public schools, which the nation is moving toward quickly, and it's becoming very popular, and it is an alternative. And that's going to be what's going to have to happen in the future as the population grows anyway. So that is a real alternative, and it's just hard for me to believe that DPS did the thorough job that they claim they did, and that was left out of the report and wasn't even considered. So there's a way for us to maintain our natural open spaces, and there's a way that we can still school our children, and it's called the internet, online. That's the way the nation is moving, and that's the way we're going to have to deal with these problems in the future. And you, as city council, it's your duty and your responsibility to think decades beyond, because this is going to keep coming up. This ain't going to be the last time, and that's a solution that I propose. I think it makes sense, and I'm just sorry that DPS forgot to include that in their study. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Washington. Thank you. I want to thank all the speakers tonight for your eloquence and your respect and your civility. It was very pleasant to hear both sides of this issue. Now we take questions from the council, and then the meeting, and then the public hearing is closed. So, council members, questions. I have to get this erased from here, the list of speakers. By the way, we had 22 speakers, so we did have time for a couple more. Thank you for your generous time. Okay, is he the first? All right, I'm being told by those who have, there we all are. Okay, Councilman Lopez.
Thank you, Madam President. I have a question for DPS and also for somebody from Parks and Rec. And so there's two questions that I have. One was, a comment was made about Native American human remains at the site of Hentzell Park. Can somebody say yay or no, yes or no?
I think Ms. Dana Miller is
I
coming
think I
up.
may know the answer, but I'm just, I've heard everything tonight. If that was,
Thank
if you
you,
can
Lori
confirm
Dana.
that, please.
Lori Danamiller, Manager of Parks and Recreation. That was the first that I'd heard of that potential on the site. I've never heard reference to that. Doesn't mean that it's not the case, but I have never heard reference to that.
Okay, and I just wanted to be clear. The other is of DPS. Now, I'm very curious about Hamilton Middle School and that campus shares with home in Hamilton. Was there ever a study or analysis on possibly building an elementary school on the Hamilton site? Because I know there's space there. I went to middle school there.
Sure. I'm David Supas with Denver Public Schools.
Yes.
We looked at a number of sites nearby there. Again, you have a situation where you have Hamilton, which be about 900 students, home, which is over 600 students on the same campus. Again, elementary schools we generally try to keep in the range of 500 to 600 students. So in terms of in terms of the traffic situation or the space, certainly may be possible. Of the sites we looked at, that wasn't one of the top sites. We were looking for a site in the area, which this site was very well located for the area where the students are. We put the students' needs first. And we're also looking for a site when we're looking at land or a building. A site would be in the range of 10 acres and a building in the range of 75,000 square feet. And there are very limited of those available.
Okay, and then that's the second question I was going to ask you, sir, was the footprint and the size that you would need for an elementary school, including the field. I know the field's not that big enough, Madam President, so I appreciate your...
Sure, my pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Lopez. Councilwoman Ortega.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm going to ask Kelly if you would please just put up the maps that I asked you to show us. So I have a few questions. You know, I raised some issues both in committee and the last meeting. So, and I don't want to dominate this, but I still have some outstanding issues that I think are important to raise. So one of the first ones is, can someone either from the city or from Denver Public Schools help me understand the zoning for the site? So I understand from the appraisal that it will be recommended to City Council that the zoning be changed to a new category called SMU, which stands for Suburban Multi-Unit. Most of our schools are in different zone categories, if you will. And since this has historically been open space, number one, as I understand it from talking to our city attorney's office, it doesn't require that we have to change the zoning. And then number two, my question is, why would we choose suburban multi-unit versus an open space category, which I would assume it currently is designated right now or classified as? So, Jeff, I don't know if you're the right person to answer that question or somebody from DPS, but if someone can help answer that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Sky Stewart, Mayor's Office, and I'll turn it over to Jeff in just a second. The document you looked at, the appraisal document, they make assumptions when they're appraising land, and that was one of the assumptions, that the highest and best use of that land is at a different zoning classification. This zoning is OSA, Open Space A, and does not need to be rezoned per state law to build a school on it. Jeff, I don't know if you want to jump in on the appraisal piece.
No, I was going to say the same thing. The appraisal assumes the highest and best use, which would be SMU.
Okay. So let me go back to another question that is spelled out in the appraisal. It also speaks to the fact that the property is located outside of the 100-year floodplain. And from my conversations with the people at Urban Drainage, even if the, whatever you want to call it, tributary drainage ditch, the channel that runs through the site is piped, that in itself does not take the site out of the 100-year floodplain, which really is from the Cherry Creek channel, not this drainage ditch or tributary that runs through the site. So I've been trying to wrap my brain around why we would put a school in a floodplain, or any other development for that matter. So can someone help me understand whether or not your interpretation is different from what I've been getting from the people at Urban Drainage on whether the site is in the floodplain?
Do we have somebody from Public Works here? Sky, okay, thank you.
Hi, I'm Kimberly Watanabe with Public Works, Assistant Director for Capital Projects. Yeah, the site is in the floodplain, so you're correct.
Okay, and can you, Kimberly, I'm not sure you're the right person, but can you speak to what the proposed cost is to deal with the drainage that would take that little tributary and pipe it to where it would dump into the Cherry Creek channel?
For the site itself or for the neighborhood?
For the site itself. It's my understanding it includes, as it runs along the western edge of the property, basically where the parking lot is, and then it cuts across the site and currently, dumps into the creek. And I don't know what the exact angle would be of how it would be redone. I don't think any of us have seen what those proposed drawings may look like, but I would like to know what is the anticipated cost, and as I understand it, the city has the money for that. So help me understand that.
Yes, we have currently a storm sewer project that's going to pipe drainage from that neighborhood at Hampton or Havana and Girard over to the Cherry Creek where the current ditch is. I want to say that project is about $2.5 million, and it's already funded actually through our wastewater revenue bond currently, and this was a project we had planned prior to DPS wanting to build on this site.
Okay.
Additional cost for realigning that storm sewer is pretty minimal. I don't have an exact figure for you right now.
So this is all a storm sewer project, and that's taking that little channel and piping it, undergrounding it to where it will then go into the Cherry Creek channel, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So that will involve direct input and approval of urban drainage and flood control, correct? Because we are taking the waters from that channel and putting them into the Cherry Creek channel.
Hi, Nancy Kuhn, Denver Public Works. I just want to make sure we're talking apples and oranges here. This project that we're talking about with wastewater is a completely separate project than this school site. It was previously planned, and I think we need to be asking DPS about the floodplain in their school, because this is not, Denver will not be paying for that. DPS will pay for that.
That's not what I've been told, so that's why I'm asking these questions.
Right.
Because
So I just don't
I've
want
been told by people in the mayor's office that this is a project that was moving forward, that it was going to be covered with wastewater dollars, which I just heard a minute ago. And so that's why I want to know what the real costs are and what Denver's paying for and what Denver Public Schools is paying for, because Denver Public Schools got a big bond issue to take care of these school buildings that will be built and some of the renovations that are going to take place. So,
all right, so let's re-clarify. We had a storm sewer project already planned for this neighborhood to take this neighborhood to basically fix some localized draining issues on this site. In the neighborhood. It's a very localized flooding issue that's happening on Girard. That project is going to go forward whether or not Denver Public Schools builds a school on this site. So if the site is on a floodplain, DPS is going to have to pay for that and deal with that. It's going to be a completely separate project. We will work with them and coordinate because we're going to be working on the same site in the same area. But Denver, City of Denver is not responsible for taking this school out of the floodplain, and no city dollars are going to be used to take this site out of the floodplain. It will be a DPS responsibility.
So Nancy, help me understand how we determine where we apply city policy, because since I've been back here on the council, one of the projects that came through this body was approving basically the extension of a TIF-funded development at Alameda and Broadway, where the city is basically requiring them to bear the cost of I don't remember if it's storm or drainage, and Councilman Nevitt, you can probably speak to this more articulately than I could, but it will go across that site that will be developed, and we're requiring them to absorb that cost.
So in this case, it would be the same situation. They are going to absorb the cost for taking that out of the floodplain.
Yeah, but you're now mixing apples and oranges, because the floodplain issue is different, as you're saying, which would be their cost, but in any other development project, we would say to the developer, regardless of, whether we were working on it or not, you want this site, you're going to develop it, you have to bear the cost of addressing this floodplain problem.
But we're not addressing the site problem. We're addressing the neighborhood, localized neighborhood draining issues. What we're dealing with, we're not dealing with this site issue. We're dealing with the neighborhood and getting water out of the neighborhood to a place where it can properly drain. So we see it as two separate projects, and our storm drain is going to be in the place that it was planned to be, whether or not the school is built on this site.
Madam President, I have other questions. I know other council people do as well, and I'd like to allow other people to ask questions and maybe come back and proceed with others.
Okay, thank you, Councilwoman Ortega. Councilwoman Shepherd.
Thank you, Madam President. I have questions for real estate, for the Domestic Violence Center, and then also DPS. So my first question would be, from real estate, how many acres are in our real estate portfolio in total in Denver?
So your question is the totality of real estate owned by the City and County of Denver?
That is either for sale or not at this time.
Right. So I can tell you this. The City and County of Denver has 3 parcels of real estate that comprise greater than 1 acre or more. We own hundreds of remnant parcels that to give you the totality of how many square feet or how many acres that is, I can't do off the top of my head. But in terms of any that amass 1 acre or greater, we have 3 parcels.
Was it ever considered to aggregate some of these other parcels and sell them in order to fund the purchase of the Fox building for the Domestic Violence Center?
The policy for the city in terms of sale of real estate has always been that the monies that the city gains from the sale of real estate goes into the city's CIP fund for funding CIP projects.
Okay. Okay, so moving on to the Domestic Violence Center, folks, I don't know who wants to take that question. I heard 2 speakers imply, or they said that the lease was posted in October, even prior to the Parks and Rec Advisory Board meeting.
Madam President, I'm Steve Siegel. I work at the Denver District Attorney's Office, and I am a part of this project and have been for the last 8 years. There is no lease that any of us know about with DPS for this project. That is...
I think I heard the Domestic Violence Center. Is that not what I heard? And I see some people
I
in the
believe
audience
that was stated by two opponents to the project. There are no members of the domestic violence program who can speak to any lease because one does not exist.
Okay. And then one final question for Denver Public Schools. What other commercial sites were considered? I mean, I really want cross streets and things like that because I have not received that information.
Yeah, I do not have a list of those sites. We looked south to the Tech Center and west to I-25 within a radius which we could, where the kids were and where the need was. I do not have a list of those sites.
So I just want to make a quick comment that, my colleague, Councilwoman Ortega, asked for a lot of very specific questions related to this, and we received tons and tons and tons of data, maps, charts, in order to address her questions. But I find it really, really troubling on this particular question that there's no documentation about what else was considered. And I guess my final question would be, if the vote didn't go your way tonight, what would be your option? Because I never heard a plan B.
We would look at other options at that point.
Okay.
I don't have other options that I've pursued.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Shepherd. Councilwoman Kanish.
Thank you, Madam President. I have a question that follows up on my colleague by pure coincidence. There was a speaker, Mr. Stephen Watson, I believe. Is he still here? Steve Walston. You mentioned specifically that there were many other locations in the district or the area that could be candidates for the school. I'm curious if you can list the specific locations that you think.
Just one that just driving around the neighborhood, one that came to mind is the empty Kmart store on Monaco and Iliff. Mm-hmm. Very big property, obviously big enough, and it's been empty for quite a while.
Any
That's the only
others?
one that came to my mind.
Okay, great, thanks. Mr. Supis, was that particular site considered?
Yeah, I think that property is not for sale. I'll let Kelly Lead, who is involved in this process, speak a little bit. I will say, just from recent information received, in a radius of, I believe, around 5 miles around the site, I believe there was one site of sufficient size that existed, and it's under development, I believe, at I-25 in Hamden currently. So again, there may be individual places that people have seen, but suitable sites, again, the size required for a school development or a building for a school are very significant in those sites. We are unaware of other sites. Kelly, did you want to add anything about the prior work?
My name is Kelly Lead. I'm the Director of Development Services for the City and County of Denver, and previously to joining the city, I was the Director of Operations for Denver Public Schools and conducted those site searches. I was part of a team that did that. So we start with, in any site search or any exercise about where we need to have growth, is we started with sites that this district currently owns. So in this part of the city, you would look at the existing school sites. You have an elementary school, you have a middle school, and you have a high school roughly in this region. And I should back up. You actually start with what's the need. The need is, based on the demographic studies, is that we have hundreds of elementary school kids that live in this region that the area is going to grow, and you cannot serve the needs of those students in the existing schools you have. So that's the need. The second is what grades or what ages are these children that you need to serve. In this case, it is elementary school children. So there are very specific programmatic needs that you think about when you talk about elementary school kids in terms of starting to develop a site selection process. So we start with the sites that the district has, and we have the district has a long history of starting with the land it owns, where we can add capacity, we can add portable facilities, we can add capacity to existing buildings. And we went through that exercise at the existing elementary, the existing middle school, and the existing high school in the area, which is TJ. In the case of, and it's already been referenced tonight, the middle school, we actually already moved elementary school kids in a wing of the middle school to use underutilized capacity at that middle school. We've added portable buildings at that site. There are interesting site constraints at those schools, and so long story short is we ruled out existing school facilities that the district owns for the kind of investment you're going to need to make to serve the number of kids that we need to serve long term. So the next step is you start to look at sites in the catchment area. We went as far north as Hampton. We went up to Hampton. We went as far west as I-25. We looked at a parcel of land. Again, you're looking at a 10-acre parcel. We looked at a parcel of land that's owned by Denver Water. We looked at a couple of sites in the north part of Denver Tech Center. And then we came back across to the east and tried to find a site closer, because the farther west you move, the farther you get away from where the kids are, which then adds other costs associated with not just developing the bricks and mortar of a building, but also now the long-term transportation needs of moving kids in and around this district. So we continued to come back to the site that's in question. At Hampton Heights. And again, we spoke with and worked with the council office, with Peggy's office. She had an interest in having a rec center on the site. We sat down and talked about how we might be able to do a shared facility at the site, which we've successfully done. When we're spending the same people's money, you're spending the same taxpayer money to do these projects. So how could we leverage the investment and make a rec center and schoolwork? At the end of the day, that was ruled out as well. But when we finished all the analysis of looking at the pros and cons of each site, school sites, the private development sites that would be available to actually build a school without driving up the cost substantially, we continued to come back at this. This was not only the preferred site, but the ideal site to build a school building. And when you're going to spend, upwards of 18 to 20 million to build a school, you take that long view and say, if we're going to build an elementary school, we need to serve upwards of 500 to 700 students ultimately in an elementary school. And this is also, by the way, an ECE. We'll have an ECE component that will have a double benefit to these students, because we'll be able to pull ECE students out of the existing elementary schools in the region, create more capacity in those schools to serve elementary school age kids. So this investment, this project, has a number of benefits. So again, to close, I feel that we did a reasonable job of looking at the kinds of sites that worked for elementary-based students over the long haul. And again, at the end of the day, the Hampton Heights site made the most sense.
Okay, Matt, you go right ahead.
One very, very small follow-up. Mr. Lead, thank you for the explanation. Did you, was the Kmart referenced by one of the other speakers in the catchment area you described, and was it evaluated for its potential? Whether it was for sale or not, was it evaluated as a potential site?
We did not.
Okay. Is it in the catchment area?
I don't know. I'd have to go back.
Okay.
But I would tell you, again, for an elementary school, looking at a commercial site that was previously held by a commercial, large, big box retailer, would typically not be an ideal elementary school site.
Can you say a little bit more about why, please?
Well, when you look at the structure itself might be okay for classroom space, and we've certainly seen examples where that's done. But you need other things on the site, like playgrounds, like play fields, things that, and in this case, a site like that, and without knowing exactly where it is on the map, you have to look again at transportation costs. You have to look at other ancillary operating costs. In terms of evaluating whether any site is, when you look at the return on investment, is it the right, if we're going to spend that kind of money, is it the right site to meet the long-term needs of serving, in this case, elementary school kids? Typically, large, big box retail sites are not appropriate elementary schools.
Thank you. Do you have more, Councilwoman? Okay, thanks, Councilwoman Kanish. Councilwoman Robb.
I have a question for Jeff Steinberg to start with. I was well aware that advocates for a domestic violence center had their eye on 1330 Fox. They talked to me 5 years ago in my second term in office. But I'm curious, when you were first approached by DPS about their interest in 1330 Fox, or when you first approached DPS?
We approached DPS probably 2 years ago. Actually, we responded to DPS 2 years ago when they came forward and asked what parcels of real estate the city and county of Denver has, period. And we just divulged the acreage that we have, and obviously the site at Hampton Heights was one of those that was discussed. Subsequent to that, as DPS came forward and expressed an interest in acquiring that site, we had several challenges with it. Number one, as was discussed earlier, Councilman Lehman did not want that site sold because she had a vision of a rec center being built on that site, so we knew that we couldn't sell the site. And as we continued to work with DPS and come up with the idea of at least having shared ball fields and potential open space that would be dedicated at the school for neighborhood use, the concept of doing a trade with DPS was developed.
So when do you think that concept was developed?
I would say it would have been less than a year ago, give or take, right around a year.
A year ago, so maybe last May. Okay, that answers my question. We know a rec center, well, from Central Denver, doesn't take more than 2 acres. When I heard that we were talking 11 plus acres here, I said, ooh, that's a lot. But I have a question now, I suppose, for DPS. On June 18th, in the information Sky Stewart sent us, sent to all council members, there was a link to a presentation entitled 2012 Bond and Mill Levy Planning. It's dated June 18th. And when you presented that, were the school board members told that this would be a swap situation?
I believe so, yeah. I actually am not 100% sure what was included in the materials, but I believe in the materials, there were some very long materials. I'm not sure if you're looking at the very major materials, maybe 100-page type decks.
Well,
or
I do have, Kelly, do you have that
25-pager.
page from the report to put up? It was page 47 of the June 18th presentation.
Oh, sure.
This one?
I think she's looking for a
No.
picture, page 47. Maybe in the PowerPoint.
It's the one with the map.
Okay.
We'll come back to the other one. That one. I'm not sure if you can see at the top, but it's the scope of work description.
Yeah.
And it says 2 things of interest. Land purchase approximately $3.0 million. So the price hadn't been finally determined because I think it's at 3.2 now.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm curious about why that changed. But then the bridge construction from Dartmouth to Havana at 1.5 to 2.0 million, and the total project, including the bridge, is 21.3 million. So my question is, are you building a bridge?
No, we're not.
So-
We don't plan to at this point.
Excuse me?
We don't plan to build a bridge at this point.
Okay.
Because 2 traffic studies were completed. And part of the result of those traffic studies, initially the plan was to use Dartmouth and build a bridge. But some of the results from the traffic studies indicated there were problems with that and that it would be better to move down to Girard. And so that was the second traffic study yielded that they felt that the traffic flow would work better with ingress and egress from the site heading southbound, right lane, but also using Girard as the primary access point, but not needing to build the bridge.
Okay, I found the conclusions in those 2 traffic studies somewhat contradictory. The one that I guess ended up with Girard also suggested, I thought, secondary right-in, right-out access on Havana to accommodate buses. I wasn't sure where that would be. Kelly, could you put up the one about you just flashed on it before. This is from the one that was talking about the Dartmouth access, and I thought they were considering both Dartmouth and Girard in this. Okay, so I highlighted in yellow. Those are my highlights, but this is from the Aldridge report. Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have the date right in front of me. May. Okay. It talks about a level of service D with 500 students. I'm confused about how many students you're planning to have because an October presentation to the board talked about a 250 ECE option and a 500 elementary option. So I'm still not clear how many students you're committing to having there that goes with these traffic studies.
Well, the traffic studies basically supported up to 830 students on the site. Currently, our plans could include an early education center, but those aren't part of our initial plans, and that would be 250 students.
Even though that was presented on October 31st to the board?
Tell me what you're reading.
I'm reading Hamdenites Southeast Elementary and ECE proposed capacity from Hamdenites Southeast Elementary and Early Childhood Education Center, November 8th, 2012.
Yeah, we've been very clear all along that it was either going to be an elementary school and potentially an early education center if both were needed. Right, and the preliminary design showed the ability to build both on the site, and that's what we asked our folks to do. Right now, our belief is the primary need, or the highest need, is an elementary school. The school the design would accommodate. If we wanted to add a 250-seat early education center after the fact, we could do that, but right now we're not planning to do that. Our initial plan would be to build a 500-seat elementary school.
Okay, well, the levels of service aren't great even at the 850 or 750 level. Let me ask one other question that Councilwoman Ortega brought up, and this is about the zoning. I wasn't going to get into it, but since it came up, it's currently zoned OSA. And my recollection from going through the brain damage of the zoning code update, I don't have this in front of me, is that any building in OSA must be approved by the manager of Parks and Recreation.
So I'm not going to pretend to be a lawyer, but it's my understanding, and I'll let David jump in if I'm wrong, that under state statute, DPS as an entity of the state doesn't need to follow any of our zoning regulations. So they can build in whatever zoning we already have on site.
That wasn't the question I was asking you. I was asking a question about the OSA zoning.
If you want me to grab the zoning code, I'll get it.
Why don't we come back to it?
Okay.
Because I remember we had a long discussion about the size of a building that could be approved in the open space. I think some of the people here might remember that. Thanks.
Are you finished, Councilwoman? Okay, thanks, Councilwoman Robb. Councilman Brooks.
Okay, can I call, thank you, Madam President, I just have a question. Lori Dannemiller up. This has to do with parks. And I want to know, I'm looking at a website for the Trust of Public Land, and I'm looking at our park score, Lori, and I was kind of pleasantly surprised to find out that we were ranked 13. I mean, not the highest rank, but I'm gonna name some of the folks. Here we got San Francisco, Sacramento, Boston 3, New York, Washington, Portland, Virginia, San Diego, Seattle, Albuquerque, San Jose, and then Denver 13, and Chicago. We're ahead of Chicago, which is kind of nice. But I'm wondering, 13, and we always want to be a little bit higher. So what are we doing? First of all, what's the methodology to get a better park score, one? And two, what are we doing to get more acreage? Because that seems to be the major concern from a lot of the folks here.
Thank you. My understanding of the methodology is basically to look at population and acreage in park usage, and the standard, the goal from TPL is 10 acres per 1,000 residents, right? what we are doing, we are constantly trying to achieve our game plan goals, which say take advantage of opportunities that are presented to you when parcels, become available that could be in park use. But we just don't go kind of randomly and say, let's continue to acquire property. We have a standard even within the game plan that says try to achieve 10 acres per 1,000 people. So we're trying to balance, the needs and the CIP needs of the rest of the city within some standard. And so, we are actually at that standard right now. We're at 10. If you add in our mountain parks, it adds 24. So theoretically, we're at 34 acres per 1,000 residents. So we're well beyond. But I understand that the real standard right now probably should be the 10 because a lot of people don't access our mountain parks. But we try to achieve the game plan goals and the national standard. When there are parcels that present themselves to us, we evaluate them, and we may at some point go beyond that. For example, we're looking at another property in northeast Denver where there's very little access because of a railroad track for folks on the north side of this area. And so, yeah, we can evaluate that property and say, we may be beyond the standard, but here's an issue that would, require us to go beyond because access is poor in that neighborhood. Or there are other neighborhoods where we see an imbalance. If you look at District 4, it's the highest, to my knowledge, acreage per capita in all the city, but we look at District 3, and there's about 3 acres per 1,000 is my understanding. So
4.2.
4.2, thank you. So if there were an opportunity in District 3, we would probably look to go beyond the standard in that case because we try to look at equity, which is another game plan goal.
I'm glad you answered that question. That was my next question is, what district has the most parkland? It's District 4, the one that we're looking at, and then District 3. Unfortunately has the less. Here's my question. What do you have in the queue for to expand our park acreage?
The document. So our plan between 2012 and 2017 is to acquire an additional 392 acres. That includes Lowry. That includes North Stapleton. Of course, some of the Montbello property we referenced, smaller acres in Sun Valley, First Creek Trail, the southeast corner of Vanderbilt Park, some Westerly Creek acreage, and then Sand Creek through Denver, and then some North Side Park. So that's about 392 acres up until 2017, which is our plan at this point.
Okay. And just last question. In your experience and working for the city, have we ever done anything like this, any kind of land swap that included taking away some of the park acreage? Not park, but natural.
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Brooks. Councilman Brown.
Lori, thank you, Madam President. To be sure, we had a civil discussion tonight. However, embedded in some of the comments that we heard were some direct attacks on you, the administration, and of this council, pertaining to the apparent lack of concern that we have for the park and specifically for wildlife. And I took notes, and we were accused of cannibalizing the land, raping the land, destroying a park, taking out a treasure, and that our legacy will be the death of animals. Is there someone with a wildlife background that can address these issues?
Scott.
Scott?
I will preface my comments by that's probably you're going to get a broad response, right? But Scott has worked in the wildlife industry for over 20 years, formerly with the Colorado Park System, and is a resident expert, and I can tell you cares deeply. And works towards every day trying to preserve as many species of plants, animals as we possibly can to the enjoyment of our citizens.
Hello, Council. Thank you very much for having me. My background is I am a wildlife biologist. I grew up in Northeast Denver, and I got the experience of being able to go walk into the arsenal before there was a fence. I got to experience some open spaces in my neighborhood. That's where I learned to enjoy nature, and that's what drove me to become a wildlife biologist. I went to CSU. I have my wildlife degree. I have an aquatics degree, and I have a conservation biology degree. I worked for 18 years for the Division of Wildlife teaching kids about the outdoors. I ran the statewide fishing program. But I took kids fishing, but I taught them about the outdoors. This space, once this issue came up, I've walked this space probably a dozen times. I've started at one end and walked into Hentzell Park. I started at the parking lot and then actually walked into, that's Hamden Heights open space, and then I walked into Hentzell Park. It's a beautiful space, I will agree with everybody. Hamden Heights the Hamden Heights open space does have prairie dogs on it, but the property that we de-designated is prairie dogs, and it is degraded. It is a degraded site. The site that we are looking at building the school on would be an improvement. It actually, if you have an open space and you can't get people into it, how do you educate? And I heard a lot of comments about we need to get kids out into these open spaces and teach them about the outdoors. What a better way of putting the school there and actually walking kids straight into the natural area, providing amphitheaters, taking them down into the creek, teaching them about aquatic ecology, teaching them about history, why people came to Colorado. I visited the Colorado History Museum today with a group of school kids, and we talked about why people came to Colorado. This space, and I heard others talk about animals being moved out of this space. The animals aren't going in, the hawks, the owls, the deer, the coyotes, the foxes, they will all still be there. They have adjusted to humans. These animals are in all of our parks. As everybody knows, we've seen bald eagles in Washington Park, City Park, Berkeley. The animals are living in our parks. And so I think this site could be a win-win for everybody. We can have a site. What good does it do to have an open space area? One of the tenets of our Natural Areas program is to get people into those sites and activate them. This would help us do that. So
Scott, if I may, you can address Renee Lewis's comments. Where's Renee?
Which one was that?
She took the walk in the park, and she was very much concerned about the wildlife.
Mm-hmm.
And you can, I'm not going to speak for you, but what can you assure?
Like I said,
thank you.
I worked for the Division of Wildlife for 18 years. I've taught kids about this. I'm very passionate about it. This is how I live my life. I would never do anything within the Parks Department that would remove that out of our park system. Hentzell Park is a very large park. This isn't like we're going in to build over the whole park. It is a 9-acre piece in the corner of the Hamden Heights open space that the school will be built on, and then there will still be additional 70 acres of parkland that could be accessed from this site. It's not like this site is going away. And then we will work on enhancing this site to actually improve the natural area qualities of the site. So.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Scott.
No, I'm sorry. With question time is left to the council. Thank you. Councilman Brown?
No, that's all. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Ortega.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate you allowing me to do round 2 here. So I want to get back to some of the cost issues, which I think are really critical to this conversation. And again, I just want to clarify that I am an advocate for the Domestic Violence Center. I serve as the board president of a nonprofit Latina Safe House organization that does work with victims who, with individuals who are victims of domestic violence. And I'm committed to that work and commend my colleagues who are here that do that work with victims. And I don't question the need for a school in this quadrant, but I think for this body to vote on this issue tonight, this is part of the due diligence that we have to go through that we didn't get a chance to get completely addressed during the one committee meeting where we dealt with the contract issue. There was a previous meeting where there were discussions about taking some of the open space that we have that hasn't been formally designated and moving forward to designate that land. Those are all, that's a separate issue than this contractual arrangement between Denver Public Schools and the City of Denver. And for me, the bottom line comes down to cost, transparency in the process, concerns about this being a precedent-setting move that potentially can be looked at by other people that want to buy city land with the expectation that we should do the improvements on the site before it's sold, but not charge that as part of the cost of the land. And then there are safety concerns associated with the site. One of the things that I was able to explore and had some follow-up conversations with people from CDOT was, and we actually had a meeting with Denver Public Schools with some of my colleagues talking about safety issues at some of our schools. As you know, in the last few weeks, we've seen pedestrians hit across the city, one of which was, right over by East High School. And so pedestrian safety around our schools is a big issue, and it's one that we don't want to create at the front end if we can avoid that. And
Councilwoman Ortega, excuse me, my apologies. Do you have a question that you'd like to ask?
Yes. So let me get to my question.
My deepest apologies.
So on the cost side, the contract spells out one price for the value of our land and the Denver Public School land. The appraisal spells out a different price, and I don't know which one is correct. So in the contract, let me pull it up, on page 6, it says Fox Street is valued at $3,505,000, and the Hampton Heights site is valued, and I'm assuming these are based on appraised values, at $2.8 million. But yet in the actual appraisal document that I got today, it says that 3.2 is the value of the Hampton Heights 11.5 acre parcel that we're talking about. So I'm not sure which one's correct because we've had both documents in front of us. So Jeff, can you clarify what is the right appraised value of the Hentzell Park site?
Yes. There were 4 appraisals done on the 2 parcels that are in question. The City and County of Denver appraised the Hentzell Park property through our appraiser, Integra Realty Resources, as well as appraising 1330 Fox Street. Additionally, DPS engaged, I believe it was Peter Bowes, to do appraisals of each of those 2 same respective properties.
So we did 2 and they did 2.
That's correct.
Okay.
And there was a difference in each of the 2 properties as to what the appraisers came to conclusion on. And what we did is negotiated basically in the middle for each of the 2 properties the value that we were going to use for the delta in the transaction in
So
question.
which one am I supposed to use that is correct?
Well, they are
that
all,
we're using as the value of this transaction.
they are all correct. So in other words, what we come back to is a difference of appraiser opinion. So what we
But
use,
we settle on a figure, right?
we settled on a figure which is not going to be the appraisal. It's going to be a settlement between the delta of each
so
of the
what
2
is that
respective.
figure?
Well, what we agreed on was $3.2 million was the value of the City and County of Denver's property, and $3.905 million was the value of the property for 1330 Fox, Denver Public Schools.
3.9. So you're saying it's still the difference of the 705,000?
That's correct.
Okay. All right. So let me move on to my next question, and I apologize. Again, I tried to get some of these questions addressed during the committee process. So when you look at the site and the fact that the two traffic studies call for the widening of Girard Street, because as I was told when I went out and did the walkthrough of the site, that the entrance off of Girard would be the main entrance into the school. So who will cover the cost of that? So that's one. And then the second issue is the access to the site off of Havana, and whether that actually requires, and Kelly, I'm going to ask you to put up the one slide that shows the bridge that was in one of the traffic studies, and it's the overlay on the site. So what I'm trying to understand is, as it appears on this document, it crosses over the creek, if I'm not mistaken, and I don't know if that involves urban drainage and flood control having to approve, and then what the cost is and who's going to address that. And then my last question will be about the drainage pond that CDOT required on this site that was done when Havana was widened some time ago, and what happens to those ponds. Because it's my understanding with that it will require CDOT having to amend their water quality permit with Colorado Department of Health and whatever the E stands for, CDPHE, Health and Environment. So, so on here, as you can see, this moved away from Dartmouth being the interchange for I'm not sure what reasons, but looking at this, and I'm not sure if this was the bridge that somebody else was referring to, and as one of the studies calls for, it would be access into the site going southbound on Havana, and from the site going southbound onto Havana. So there is no left-hand turn into the site from traffic going northbound. At least that's what the studies call for. But this shows a bridge that is access into the site. And I'm trying to get a handle based on the studies that were done by Denver Public Schools, the two traffic studies, what else is needed, and is that part of the cost that Denver Public Schools is going to be expected to incur in order to ensure that the only access to the site is not just off of Girard Street, which will create serious bottleneck for the neighborhood and for traffic trying to get in and out of the school. So Jeff, I don't know, you want to take a stab?
The bridge is not going to be built. This bridge, as David Supas said earlier when he was up here, is at one point in time, DPS was entertaining the idea that the ingress and egress to the site, the major ingress and egress to the site would be via Dartmouth, and if that were the case, it would have required the bridge. That is not going to be how the property is going to be oriented. And
okay, so we're talking a bridge on Havana, but to get off of Havana to the site, as I understand it, it would require some kind of bridge over the creek, depending on exactly where that is on the site. And I don't know to what degree any of the construction drawings are in the works or whatever, but it would be helpful to know where that ingress and egress is proposed to be off of Havana.
So I'm not sure what document this is, but I can tell you that one of the early studies looked at Dartmouth and creating a full intersection at Dartmouth, which would be to the north of the site, And then it would bring a bridge, so you'd have a full intersection, and there was a study done that showed the possibility of a bridge that would create access off of Dartmouth at the intersection onto the site. That was subsequently ruled out through additional civil engineering work between CDOT and the engineers that were doing the analysis for DPS. This is not a bridge. I mean, this looks like more of a channel, a water channel study. This is not any document I've certainly seen as part of some of the early studies we did on the site. There is, as part of the current civil studies, though, there would be a deceleration lane created on the parcel with a right in and right out off of Havana.
Does that require a crossing
It does not.
over the creek?
It does not.
Because that's on Girard.
No, it's not
There
on
is no
Girard.
bridge. There is no need for a bridge. It's been ruled out.
Well, part of the reason I'm asking this question is when we did the walkthrough, we were told, I asked the question, where the other access point was going to be, because clearly just to get traffic in and out of Girard isn't going to work.
Right. So there will be two access points. There will be a right in and right out off of Havana.
Where on the site?
Well, if you go back to, I think, do we have a map that shows the school layout? If not, we can certainly provide that. I know one's been provided that shows the layout of the school. But there would be a right in and right out, a deceleration created off of Havana with a right in, right out off of Havana, and then you would also have a signalized intersection at Girard.
Okay, this guy's getting a map, and I think it'd be helpful just to see that.
So it's, from this map that's up there, it would be from where the I'm going to use the parking lot as a reference point. So roughly at what would be the northern edge of the parking lot, give or take, would be the right in and right out onto the site. Off a deceleration lane.
So which is about half a block off of Girard, is what you're saying, looking at the site.
Again, we have technical people who are civil engineers that are working on the project that will work directly with CDOT engineers and city engineers. It's got to meet all kinds of requirements in terms of where that right in and right out can be. It's got to meet CDOT requirements. And I've not seen the latest design, but nonetheless, there is a right in and right out proposed off of Havana, as well as the signalized intersection at Girard.
Okay, and then my last question, Kelly, is, and you and I talked about this earlier, about sidewalks on Havana. It's my understanding there aren't any there today. And will the city, wearing your city hat, require sidewalks on Havana for school traffic trying to get to the site? Because I understand they're going to come from mostly the neighborhoods to the west, both, north and south of the site.
It would be fair to say that yes, any sidewalks, to the extent we need pedestrian access off of Havana, where there currently is not sidewalks, that sidewalks would be added, and those are included in infrastructure costs that are part of the overall project costs for the development of the school.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam
Thank you very much. Thank you, Councilwoman Ortega. Councilman Brooks.
Yep, just a quick question. I just wanted a show of hand of how many people live within 1 mile radius of this proposed site. Okay, thank you.
Okay. I don't see other questions. So with that, I am going to close the public hearing for Council Bill 171 and ask for comments by council. I'm going to call upon Councilwoman Lehman first.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to take a moment to thank all of you, because I know that for at least 98% of you, this isn't the first time you have come out to some time to some place to comment on this. And that I know everyone here, whether you spoke pro or you spoke con, has given this a lot of thought. And I appreciate that. And it's part of the democracy that we have. And that's why we're here tonight. So I want to thank you for kind of taking your time this evening. I first want to share with you a really quick, I've heard lots about, we didn't know about this soon enough. there's public process. And so what I have done is just kind of categorize the number of meetings and other things that I've had. This is only my office. DPS had additional ones, but I don't know about those, so I'm just telling you what my office did. So as you know, the DPS went to the election 3A and passed a bond issue, and the money for this project is coming from the bond issue. DPS had several open meetings about what to put on the bond issue, and the school, and they had a big committee, and the school was one of the things they decided to put on this bond issue. They were in a quandary. How much time do they put in it once they know about the school? Do they put into public meetings when they don't even know if 3A will pass or not? So that was their decision that they had to make. And we were in similar, the city in 2A was in a similar quandary. Do you go and really look at how many hours you're going to put into a library and how you're going to do it and what do the people think about it before we even know we have the money to do that? And it's just a public issue quandary. Okay. Then my touch with this began in October, and I learned about it, and in October on my website there was information on this proposed thing. Then it was brought to INC Parks Committee. On November 6th, 3A was passed, so then they could go forward. Between November 6th and today, I have been to 4 neighborhood association meetings explaining this. I went, as you heard, to 1 House District 9 monthly meeting where there was a forum where we talked about pros and cons. There were 2 Parks and Rec Advisory Board meetings where both of them had public meetings, public hearings. I did 5 issues of my Peggy's Pages. It goes out once a month at the beginning of the month. And between October and the one that just went out last week, I talked about this 5 times in my Peggy's Pages. There were 2 council committee hearings on this, one at Ludi and one at Government and Finance, and there was a public hearing at that point. And I wrote 2 articles in neighborhood association newsletters. So there was a lot of, in my view, a lot of public information put out there. Okay, so I have learned about this, heard from all of you, heard from DPS. I am immersed in this. And I want to tell you that I'm a strong supporter of this project. I am your city council person. I am just not a parks person. I am a family person. I am a neighborhood person. I am a domestic violence person who knows that that is needed. I have to look at the whole project and what this offers to our city. This domestic violence center would, as you heard, would offer wraparound services and is extremely needed. And the importance of one place to get this domestic violence center services all together is incredibly important. As you've also heard, the need for the new school in this area is great. Not only does this new school provide for primary students, that means the oldest kids there would be 8 or 9, the youngest would be 3 or 4. That's the age of student that will be attending this school. It would provide additional, not only good and I hope smaller classes for children in the primary, the ECE and primary age that need smaller classes, but also provide more room in the schools that are now overcrowded. It also provides a community meeting place for that neighborhood that is closer than any other community meeting place. And it also includes sports fields and a playground that the community has available when schools are not using them. Tonight, if you have an agenda, you will see that, just a minute, that there is in Council Bill 13-0169 that was on second reading and passed, 15.9 acres of naturalized area that was dedicated natural area has become a part of the Hentzell Park dedicated parkland. That means in order to do anything else with those 15.9 acres, it has to go to the vote of the people. So given all those things, plus Scott's great talk about making this an outdoor education site, it is only positive, I feel, for my district and for the city of Denver, and I urge my fellow council people to vote for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Lehman. Councilwoman Ortega.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll try not to be redundant with some of the comments that I made earlier. So clearly this project has brought to light the importance of looking at our portfolio of parkland and realizing how much unprotected land that we had. And I appreciate the efforts that Parks and Recreation has made in clearly identifying which we need to move forward with, and I know part of that includes addressing title searches and making sure that we own the land and all of that to move forward with the designation of all of those eventually. And as Councilwoman Lehman said earlier, there are some of those that we've moved forward with. For me, the biggest issue with how this deal has come about, which addresses both properties, is just the concern about the costs and which costs will be borne by the city of Denver and which will be borne by Denver Public Schools. The concern about information that was different in some of the documents. I think we got some of that clarification tonight. The concern about it being a precedent-setting move for both the expectation that other people will think that Denver should pick up infrastructure costs when we sell any of our land, but also getting rid of what has been undesignated land. And again, I think the measures to try to protect that are in the works. But the safety issues, the concern about cost of the drainage, the concern about cost of the roadway improvements both to Girard Street and to Havana Street are unknowns in terms of what the Denver taxpayers and the city of Denver's budget would be expected to incur. And I am not comfortable moving forward in supporting this tonight based on all of those issues. If you look at when the traffic studies were completed, the date on them is May of 2012, which means they would have had to be approved by either the admin staff of Denver Public Schools or the board long before that, and given them time to do the actual work. So the fact that the neighbors and this body didn't know anything about this until I think the earliest was October, November, when we started hearing from some of you that live in the neighborhood. I want to thank all of you who have reached out and shared your concerns both in favor and in opposition. This is part of the democratic process. I think your input has helped all of us to look at this a lot more closely in terms of what is the right thing for this body to do in whether we approve or oppose what has been put on the table in front of us. I don't believe the legislative body is here to be a rubber stamp for everything the administration brings forward. It's our job to do the due diligence and make sure that we're asking the right questions and ensuring that in the big picture scheme of things that this is good for the whole city. And I'm not convinced that all sites have been thoroughly explored as possibilities for this school. And I'm just not comfortable voting in favor of it. So I will be a no vote tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Ortega. Councilman Brown.
Well, thank you, Madam President. You know, there are many directions on how one approaches this issue. I noted that my colleague, Councilwoman Lehman, said that she's a neighborhood person, a school person, etc., but she's not a park person. Well, I am a park person, and that's how I approach this issue. I spent 8 summers in a national park, specifically Grand Teton National Park, as a river guide and naturalist. And I'm sure some of you will wish I were still there tonight. I floated 28 miles on the Snake from Moran to Moose, and it was one of the better jobs I've ever had. And I believe, along with many historians, with many ecologists, preservationists, conservationists, that the creation of our national park system was America's best idea. Now you might say, what the heck does that have to do with this? Because I think it is directly related, because I think the park system that we've created in Denver is one of our better ideas, and we should all be proud of it. As one enters Yellowstone National Park on the Montana side, Gardner, Montana, there is an arch. Going back to when this park was preserved, this area was preserved in 1872, before the territory of Wyoming even became a state. Our first national park. It was the first national park in the world. And above that arch, there is an inscription with 8 simple words: for the benefit and enjoyment of the people. And I think that we can apply that national park philosophy to our parks in Denver, for the benefit and enjoyment of the people. If I thought that building this school would harm the wildlife, I would not support it. But I am confident it will complement our educational system, especially at that elementary school level, where it is needed desperately. And so I support this tonight, and I want to thank Councilmember Lehman for all of her hard work and diligence. I know it's been tough, and I know, like on many issues we have down here, and Councilman Robb knows this better than many of us, we have friends on both sides. We have friends on both sides, and this is not easy. But I support this tonight. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilman Brown. Councilman Lopez.
Thank you, Madam President. I am not a ecologist or a wildlife guru, but I'm also a neighborhood kid. And, you know, tonight I heard different people talk about their passions, both for this project and against it, and for this land swap and against it. And I just want to say I wholeheartedly believe what some of you had said, stated, I mean, folks who support the park and are also supporters of domestic violence, or the Domestic Violence Center and the cause to end domestic violence, right? And vice versa. And I think, you know, for whatever reason, and for whatever, you know, situation that we're in right now, I wish it can be a win-win. I am somebody who is a park person as well. I come from a district that has 4.2 acres per 1,000 people of parkland, the least in the city. Has high obesity rates, high heart disease rates. Why is this national measure important? Because it's almost formula. It's damn near scientific to know that the more park acres you have, the healthier the community will be, and the longer they will live. I know this because this has been a cause that I've taken on City Council unknowingly. It just fell into my lap, and we ran with it. We've gone so far as to testify in front of U.S. Congress for parkland. Our park that will be opened hopefully in the fall, Scott, Lori, thanks to the community and thanks to Parks and Recreation, Four Winds Park, hopefully, made national news and is a national model how we did it. We didn't wait for a threat of development. We just did it. And, you know, I totally understand that cause. What's a West Side kid got to do with a park on the opposite side of town? Well, I also went to Hamilton Middle School. And I know District 4 parks pretty well because I should have been in school some of those days, and instead we enjoyed the parkland. And they were the best memories when I was a kid. Galena, my best friend lived on Galena. And I know exactly the street and the park right in that area. I know the little pathway because we used to walk that all the time. So I do have some familiarity of the area. I'm a DPS born and raised kid. I think I attended more middle schools and elementary schools than I can actually count. But the reason why I say this is because I know that by building a school at this site doesn't mean that District 4 and the neighborhoods that surround Hentzell Park will be robbed of park space. You have double the amount of the national average recommends. Double, 20 acres per 1,000 people. In Denver, if you want to be surrounded by parks, you just travel to Southeast Denver. Beautiful parks. And, you know, if this school is built, it will not threaten that acreage. Hentzell Park will still exist, and there will still be people to enjoy it. Neighbors and kids and students. And also because, you know, despite having history in the neighborhood, you know, playing football in Bible Park during school hours, I also know that I'm not the elected leader in that neighborhood. I'm not the council person there. I don't know the issues as well as she would. And I don't pretend to know them. And I have a lot of respect for your councilwoman in making that decision in the neighborhoods that she represents. And because of that, you know, and because of the fact that, you know, there is more than ample amount of acreage of parkland, just on the Denver side, you're not far away from Cherokee Reservoir either, or the trail that leads to it. You know, I'm gonna support your councilwoman, who speaks for a lot more people than this room can ever hold. There's a lot of people who are not here, and you may nod your head, but she's the councilwoman in that district, and I'm going to support that. So that's the reality of the situation. We're not talking about Central Park, New York. We're not talking about the Comanche or Pawnee grasslands. We're not talking about a burial ground where I know some of my ancestors will not be buried. We're talking about a land that, Parks and Rec and government aside, hasn't been very different than when I remember it back in 1992. And I hope some change comes to that land, and I hope folks can enjoy it, and I hope it can become a diamond for the neighborhood and for those kids, your kids. So I wholeheartedly support this. Councilwoman, thank you for your work.
Thank you, Councilwoman Lopez. Councilwoman Shepherd.
Thank you, Madam President. I want to start off my comments today by also thanking my colleague, Councilwoman Lehman, and I really applaud her passion for her neighborhood, for her district, for families, children, and for all the really, really, really hard work that she has put into trying to find something to do with this site over her years in office. So I want to start by saying that. I also want to say that none of the comments, that I'm not here to debate the merits of whether we need a new school in Councilwoman Lehman's district or not, nor whether the need is questionable concerning a domestic violence center. I think everyone has adequately proved the need for both of those things tonight. Okay, so I just want to make that clear. I actually received an email early on from one of my own constituents in my own district regarding this potential land swap. She was in opposition, and she offered a really interesting perspective on domestic violence that I'd just like to read to you really quickly. So she has asked to remain confidential. I will not say her name. I spent my young childhood watching my father beat up my mother. In those days, the police would come and just tell my mom to be a better wife and then leave. So I very personally know that the need for support for women and children in domestic violence situations. I also know that the only place I found solace and peace was a small strip of woods behind our house. The only happy memories that I have with my mom revolve around caring for the wildlife that wandered through our yard and taking walks through the woods. I believe that it is philosophically flawed to suggest that we need to destroy nature and kill wildlife in order to protect women from domestic violence. Violence against nature and animals are just two things in the continuum that include violence against people. All three are about displaying power over something that is perceived to not be able to defend itself. The answer to helping women and children suffering from the effects of domestic violence is not by destroying nature. I just...
Please hold your applause, please.
I just wanted to share that perspective. I know this area well as a cyclist. I moved to Denver about 14 years ago. For many, many, many years, when I first lived in Denver, I did not have very much money, but I had a bike. Didn't have a very reliable car either, so even though I moved to the Denver area so that I could access the mountain areas, I didn't really have a lot of money or opportunity to do that. But I could get on my bike at the Confluence Park area, and I have traveled over all of our trail system extensively. I know it very, very well. I have probably cycled through this particular area 100 times, and I know this particular area very, very well. It is a and I've heard many of you speak to this tonight, it's a quality natural area. You can be someone that doesn't have a car or any money, and you can either cycle or walk through this area and have this amazing wilderness experience in the middle of a huge, bustling metropolitan area. You can close your eyes, you can smell the smells, you can observe the wildlife, you can see the water. In this particular area, as you all know, you can look around and you can see so much wilderness and open space, and you can imagine that even though you're in the middle of a city, that you are actually out in the wilderness, and it is an amazing experience. And I know that all the folks in this room, I don't need to tell you that. You live out there, you know that. That is really unique. I heard many of you use that word. It is a really unique and valuable and precious experience. Mr. Case, I very much appreciated your photo. We've heard the word degraded used a lot in terms of this particular area. I think your photo with all that beautiful blanket of white, fresh, virgin snow shows maybe degraded as a question of perspective. So, while I've been considering all of these issues, I actually had some communications with Lori Dana Miller and Scott Gilmore early on, asking what it would cost to rehabilitate this area. And Lori responded to me that it is going to cost about $50,000 to, again, we've heard a lot about the degradation of the area, that it's going to cost about $50,000 to fully rehabilitate and restore the area that will be designated as a part of this swap. $50,000. And I said, well, what about if you restored the entire area? What would that cost? And she said, well, if you extrapolate that figure to the 9 additional acres in the proposed swap, that would be an additional $66,000. So again, total price for the restoration of the entire area, $116,000, $116,177. Earlier today, I was talking with City Attorney David Broadwell, and I said, can you talk to me a little bit more about the charter and what is our charge under the charter with regards to the parks? It's very clear. We have been elected to protect, preserve, and maintain parks and open space. And I asked him, is there a charge anywhere in our charter about schools or building schools? And he replied, no. And I said, well, what about domestic violence or social services? Again, that was not necessarily listed as a core city function. Okay, stay with me here. I got a couple more points I'd like to make. My colleagues have heard me argue very, very passionately in recent weeks for the need for density and for smart growth and smart development in this city. We live in an area that has an incredibly limited source of water. We have, due to all the sprawl that has already happened in the Denver metropolitan area, we are constantly losing farmland and in danger of losing more through numbers of people that continue, hundreds of thousands that continue to move here. So I believe that supporting smart growth and density is extremely important because it uses less resources than sprawl does. I believe the flip side of that argument also is if we are going to support density, then we need to also work doubly hard to preserve our quality open space and our quality parks. If we develop like crazy and we don't preserve these important areas, I think not only is it a shame, but I think it degrades all of our quality of life over time, okay? So I know that's a little bit harder to wrap your brain around about what I just said, but the flip side of supporting smart growth is supporting quality parks and open space, and that is something that I have been charged to do by the charter and by being elected. So, we've heard so much about what is this, what are we going to have to pay in this transaction? What needs to happen to take care of the site, to prepare it for development? What kind of public infrastructure are we going to need? That kind of thing. So we learned that we need to spend $705,000 to DPS. I toured the site, I don't know, maybe about 6 weeks ago, and I noticed how there's so much differences it's going to take a tremendous amount of moving dirt to make that site level and prepared for development. Today is the first time I've heard that the site is actually definitely in a floodplain and that DPS is going to bear the responsibility of taking it out of the floodplain. And we've heard a lot about traffic issues and the infrastructure improvements that are going to be needed to support a public school on this site. We've talked specifically tonight about Havana and Girard Street, sidewalks. It's a little bit unclear what the cost is going to be of all that and who's going to pay for it. Kind of sounds to me like Denver taxpayers will be responsible for that. So, and I just want to say, back to the site discussion, it does concern me, according to the frequently asked questions handout that we on council received, that this site represents the only viable option to meet DPS's needs in the area. When we were speaking about the catchment area earlier tonight, and Kelly Lead was unaware of whether the Kmart site was in the catchment area, during that time, my colleague was nodding her head and was saying that it is in the catchment area. I'm concerned about the fact that there, as I said earlier, that there is no plan B. DPS doesn't have a plan B if the vote were to fail tonight. The truth is, if the vote failed, DPS would find another site. So, in conclusion, when I consider the cost of $705,000, the amount of money to level the site, taking it out of a floodplain, traffic infrastructure issues, how much will they cost? We don't know who's going to pay for that, versus the $116,177 that it would take to rehabilitate this site. To me, the choice is clear. I would say leave the site as a quality open space. There is always another site for the school. And I have discussed the way I felt with my colleague several weeks ago. She was extremely gracious about our conversation. She said she would not be furious with me going forward for me expressing my sentiment on this, but I can't support this. There's always a site for another school. Once open space, quality open space is gone, it's gone. I will not be supporting this tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Shepherd. Councilwoman Montero.
Microphone.
Can't hear you.
Thank you, Madam President. This is a difficult decision, as I used to be the public information officer at Parks and Recreation. Actually worked with Susan Baird and actually worked with the first, what was Gail's name? Gail Weinstein, the first naturalist. And so I feel very familiar and very conflicted about this particular decision. Having said that, I represent Council District 9. And tonight, in one of the testimonies, Globeville was described as an industrial wasteland. And I'm offended by that, and I know that the people that I represent will also be offended by that, because it's an area that maybe doesn't look up to par for other people, but it's an area nonetheless where people live, they do business, and they try very hard to have an improved quality of life. The area that was being talked about is very near Northside Park, which is just close to the South Platte River off of the Armory. It is close to Heron Pond, and Public Works has purchased property near Northside Park and the other area that would come on board after all the land is acquired would take that particular green space for the people that live in Globeville, that for some think is a industrial wasteland. It would improve their open space to over 80 acres. And I think they deserve that. And I think they deserve the dignity that everybody else does. I don't even know what the number is of people per acreage. but I know it's not that high. And for those reasons, I have to make a choice. And my choice is to expand the parkland for people that I represent in Globeville. And my hope is that someday we'll be able to turn around the stereotype that was expressed tonight, but that's where I'm going to come down. The other part that I also want to express, and it's important for you to hear this, I respect Councilwoman Lehman so much. We served together as council aides, and now we've served together here on City Council. And I know that I've always found her to be very methodical and analytical about the decisions she makes. Part of it is probably instinct, but I also, in talking with her, think that building the school would become a catalytic project for the neighborhood in the future. We're talking about bringing new life and new students and new families to this particular neighborhood. And so, with all due respect, I will be supporting Councilwoman Lehman, and I wanted to get that on the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Montero. Councilman Nevitt.
Thank you, Madam President. First off, I just want to thank everybody for coming out tonight, and I particularly want to thank the opponents of this deal for coming out. It's taking a stand against losing open space is exactly the right thing to do, and I applaud you for it, and I'm glad that you're out there advocating for open space and trying to urge us not to lose a single acre. The irony of this situation, at least to me, is that this really isn't about open space. This is about two institutions trying to solve a problem and finding a solution at the intersection. So we have a city that's trying to do right by victims of domestic violence, trying to find a location that is near to the Justice Center complex that can provide wraparound services, and we don't have millions of dollars to spend on it. That's what we're trying to do on the city side. And then you have Denver Public Schools facing the problem of over-enrolled schools, huge demand for elementary school seats, no existing schools to accommodate those either current students or future students, and trying to find a location to build a new elementary school to accommodate that increased demand. So Denver Public Schools is looking around for that site, and I don't know, I guess I disagree with my colleague Councilwoman Shepherd. I don't think rain doesn't follow the plow, and there isn't always a site to build a school. This site showed up. This is the spot that works. It works for Denver Public Schools for a whole host of reasons, and it belongs to us. And so by doing this transaction, we can actually get our hands on a building that meets the needs for the Domestic Violence Center, for the wraparound services near the Justice Center complex, at a dramatically lower price, a price that we can actually afford. So here you have this confluence of interest between the city and county of Denver and Denver Public Schools. The shame of it all, and I'm saying it's a shame, is that the piece of property that we're looking at is open space. And on its face, we shouldn't be getting rid of it. I agree with my colleague. We should not be getting rid of it. But we have these other interests, and we have to, as policymakers, we have to think more broadly about the whole panoply of interests at stake here. So here we have this confluence of interest between the City and County of Denver and Denver Public Schools. This works. The price is the loss of that open space. Is it worth it? Is it worth it? That's the question. I know y'all are saying no, but I'm looking at it, and I mean, on one side of the ledger, of course, is the Domestic Violence Center. This side of the ledger also is the school. So how big of a loss is that open space? It's a loss. I'm conceding that. It's a loss. But how big of a loss? And it's 11 plus acres. 3 acres of that is a defunct parking lot. It's adjacent to 70 acres that is a whole lot better open space. If you had to pick 11 acres out of the 80 acres to sacrifice, I think you'd probably pick this 11 acres. This is also a part of the city that has the most open space per capita. My colleague, Councilman Lopez, spoke quite eloquently about the other parts of the city that have a real dearth of open space per capita. This part of the city has a wealth of open space per capita. So again, I'm conceding loss of open space, bad. How bad? If you were going to take it from any part of the city, this would be the part of the city to take it from. Now, does it represent a slippery slope? Is this, are we heading down, is this, the first nail in the coffin of Denver open space? No. We continue to add new open space and new park space to our system. We're also, in fact, tonight is the final vote on designating 8 locations, and I think there's more to come, of currently designated open space and designating it as designated parkland, thereby putting it out of reach of any of these kinds of considerations. It's parkland forever. And some of that is actually in Hentzell Park. So we're actually adding to the protected parkland in Hentzell Park. And then on the plus side, and this may be cold comfort, but on the plus side, I also see, and we've had many discussions about it, that this elementary school would actually be an opportunity. In fact, Jeff Shoemaker spoke eloquently about this. This school would actually be an opportunity to do natural education for kids. So the irony, I'm sure you would take it as a bitter irony, but the irony here may be that we're sacrificing 11 acres of open space to produce a generation of advocates for open space through the elementary education. So all that is by way of saying it's a shame that the sacrifice here is some open space, but what I see on the positive side of the ledger, what I see as the great marriage of interest between the city and county of Denver and what we need to do for victims of domestic violence and Denver Public Schools and what they need to do for elementary school kids, that this is a price worth paying. So thank you, Madam President. I'll be supporting this evening.
Thank you, Councilman Nevitt. Councilwoman Kanish.
Thank you, Madam President. My colleagues have thanked those of you who spoke tonight. I want to thank an additional group of people, which is our Parks and Recs Advisory Board members. One of my appointee was unable to speak. He was in the later group there, but he is a recent appointee, Shane Wright, and you and your colleagues on this board, I know, have worked very hard, and it's been you've done the job with integrity and done your best to evaluate things. And I want you to know personally how much I appreciate your service and all of the service that you provide us as citizen members of that board. I also want to thank the staff. I'm not sure that there's been an issue that we have had quite as many inquiries, frequently asked questions, and back and forth as this one. One thing I can assure you is your elected officials have done their homework and have done their due diligence, regardless of where they fell on this. You know, I think about a call I got from a constituent last week. I put out a constituent survey, and he said, you know, Councilwoman Kinich, I'm really mad at you about this survey because you barely asked any yes or no questions. You just kept putting these choice questions. So I had a question about open space, and I said, would you compare, for example, improving the quality of the existing open space, or would you like to buy more open space, or would you like a balance of both? But he really wanted yes or no questions. He wanted me to say, do you want more open space? Yes or no. Do you want more police service? Yes or no. But that's just never the decision we face up here. When we look at a budget line item, it's would you like more police officers, or would you like more street paving? Would you like more, home ownership opportunities, or would you like more rental opportunities? We're always doing these trade-offs, and so that's the seat from which I make my decision tonight and the seat from which my colleagues have made it. I shared some of my thoughts in committee, and a very short recap is I do have some disappointments about how this unfolded. I learned about this from a constituent. I learned about it in September, and I researched it for a full 8 weeks before I received a single email from the administration or a department, and I was never briefed on it by DPS in spite of the fact that they were through my office on other bond issues and other measures. So I learned of it the wrong way, and I had to do the digging myself, and I'm disappointed about that. I'm also disappointed about some of the science that went into the de-designated decision. I think that I agree with Mr. Gilmore regarding the fact that other species will continue to exist on this parcel, but there is not an ecologist or a biologist independent of the city who will say that parcel size and impact of use doesn't matter. You add 500 cars, I'm sorry, our kids don't walk to school anymore. We have a school choice system. And you add the impacts of development, and it will impact. Will it eliminate it? I don't think so. And I'm with Councilman Brown. I would not be able to support a transaction like this. But I wish we would have been a little more honest about those impacts. And we would have said, these impacts are there when you add development, when you reduce parcel size, it impacts things. We think it's worth it, but I wish we had been a little more scientifically accurate about that. But that's not the decision I'm faced with today. I'm not faced with, did we make the most accurate decision, or did we make, do we support open space or not? I am faced with a transaction between two competing values. And, you know, I know Councilwoman Shepherd mentioned our charter, but, you know, public safety is a core component of our charter. And every individual who's a victim of abuse that I don't protect, give an option to, I'm potentially sending police resources to resolve. I'm potentially sending homicide resources to clean up. I'm sending human services resources to deal with the impacts on the children. And so I do think that protecting people's public safety in their own home is a core piece of our charter. So then I'm left with weighing these two pieces. I'm left with weighing the incredible value that I place on open space, both in, and I appreciated again Councilman Brown's comment about the value to the people. I would go even one step further though. I would say that open space has an intrinsic value. It cleans our air. It provides, a buffer for natural disasters. There's all kinds of things that it provides that go beyond just our enjoyment as people. So I want to move us from the transaction to what comes next, though, because you're wondering why you're here at 9:35 and was it worth it, the time you spent? And I think it was, because even though I'm going to vote for this transaction tonight, because I've weighed those human impacts and I weigh them a little bit heavier than I weigh these other values, it doesn't mean that you haven't been heard, and it doesn't mean that we don't have work to do. And here's what I would ask you is that we not just come down to this council when we have a transaction. I would ask that we work to transform the city's approach to open space. We are a landlocked city, and it isn't ever going to be easy There's never going to be a clean parcel of land available to grow our open space in Denver. There's never going to be an easy parcel that is affordable to add to our open space arsenal in Denver. We're never going to have enough money to restore all the spaces we have to the pristine condition we would like. That does not mean that we don't continue to prioritize. We have to buy dirty land sometimes. We have to buy old Kmarts. I will say it. We have to buy old Kmarts, and we need to plow down the parking lots, and we need to invest. And why is that? It's because of the people value that Councilman Brown mentioned. It's because of the intrinsic value, but it's also, honestly, about the economic value. When we invest in those places, people want to live here, people want to do business here, and people want to visit here, and that's the economic engine it is. And so I would ask, and I've asked my PRAB member, I have said, regardless, and he voted against this transaction, and I respect that. It's his job to vote his conscience on that body, and I support him wholeheartedly. But we have work to do, and I hope that PRAB takes a leadership role. I hope that this council takes a leadership role in saying we have to take the hard path. And I think that what that looks like is that we don't only acquire open space where it's easy. We don't only dedicate open space when it's pristine, and we have to raise the bar. And so that is where I would hope that everyone who's here tonight gets involved and doesn't just stick with the transaction, but you try to transform this city's approach. I think we have the potential. I think you heard about some of the river activities that are happening, but I think that I'm committed to that work. So I'll be voting on a very close call for this transaction tonight, but I will be dedicating my energy towards these values going forward because I think it's the right thing for our city. And I hope that others will join me, and I hope that others will continue to communicate with my colleagues and with the mayor's office so that they don't just hear from us now, but that they say, what is your funding source for acquiring open space? What is your funding source for restoring open space? And where does it rank in priority? Those are questions we should be asking in the budget cycle that comes up. They're questions we should be asking when the priorities come out next year, and we shouldn't forget about them. So I think if we do that, we have the potential to continue to build on what is a very difficult decision tonight. And I appreciate the colleagues on all sides. I respect Councilwoman Lehman greatly, but I will say I evaluate each decision on its own merits, and I would never vote on something just because a colleague was. And so I respect you greatly. It's because the merits of this weighed in the favor of this decision and not because of whose district it is and how they were voting. So I want to close with that, and thank you for your time tonight. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Councilwoman Kanish. Councilman Brooks.
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to, again, thanks for all the folks who came out in favor and against. It is 9:35. I know I'm ready to be home to kiss my babies, and so I know you guys want to get home too. So I appreciate you being there. To pay for parking, to sit in these hard benches is not easy. So thank you, thank you. I want to also thank the folks who participated in this transaction, and Kelly Lead and Jeff and Mr. Supis over here from DPS, and Lori Danamiller and Sky having to deal with all of us. I think a lot of times the public, when they come into a situation, it's pretty easy to send emails and assume the worst, but these folks have worked pretty hard. And let me say that I've read most of the emails, and I've answered the phone calls, and you know, everyone this is the beautiful piece of the democratic process. But I always try and tell people this: think the best. Do not always think the worst. This situation right here, when you think about backroom deals, when you think about cronyism, when you think about things like that, it's for a person's own good. But this deal is about something bigger, and it's about for the greater good. And so I want us to be fair in that approach. You know, this has been a tough decision. I've received a lot of phone calls, even folks, past elected officials, one in particular who is the former mayor of this city, who touts himself as being the one who acquired the most parkland of any mayor in this city. And, you know, one of the things, it's just been really tough to figure out where I'm supposed to land in this. And here are my three reasons for why I landed where I landed. Number one is unusual and extraordinary circumstances. I feel like we have an unusual and extraordinary circumstance in the place that we are in right here with the school, with the DV Center, with all of these opportunities that we have. But at the same time, with open space and it being the first time with our natural spaces that we have de-designated it. I mean, that's huge, and it's something that I don't take lightly. It's something that I've considered for a while. And when you look at all three of these issues, it's hard, especially for us who are not from this particular district to choose. I found out about all of this information, and Councilwoman Kinich took the words right out of my mouth late in the game in October as well, and didn't get a chance to be briefed. And we as public officials and as the city of Denver and Denver Public Schools can always do a much better job. And so I want to say that first and foremost. One thing that I think Councilman Nevitt kind of talked about, but is extraordinary and important to our process, should be our fiduciary responsibilities as city council individuals. And as I look at this, and there's several projects in my district that I'm trying to build from the ground up, some from existing properties. If we were to build this DV Center from purchasing land from the ground up, it would be $15 million. Because we are doing this land swap, it's $5.9 million. If we look at the school is not, we're not going to have to purchase the land. DPS would not have to purchase the land, and they're going to be able to build this school. Now, when you begin to think about taxpayer money and public money, those are all important issues that we have to consider. And this is an extraordinary way to take care of issues that are huge in our city. I think the third and final thing, and this is why I brought up Lord Dennemiller, is we are giving up, some say 11 acres. I walked the property on Friday, and it's 9 acres. There's that concrete lot there. That's 2.3, 2.4 acres, but we're giving up 9 acres of open space and getting back 392 acres over 5 years. And that's why I needed to hear from Lori Dennemiller herself saying, what is the city's plan to acquire more acreage? So I think those were some important decisions for me, and I think the data was laid out. I want to thank everybody involved, but I will be voting yes.
Thank you, Councilman Brooks. Councilwoman Robb.
Thank you, Madam President, and thanks to all of you, both private citizens and public servants in the room, DPS reps who are here tonight, Public Works, Parks, City Attorney, and I don't think anybody mentioned the passion that the DA's office has put into this project. For those of you who think we've been ignoring you, guess what? We wouldn't be talking so long if we hadn't been reading all those emails. A lot of them, it was just impossible to respond to the volume that was there, and a lot of them really didn't ask for a response. I tried to, especially to my constituents, when a response was asked for. Obviously, reasonable people can disagree, and I actually believe that we ought to, in the good of civil discourse. And obviously, there is no perfect process. As Councilwoman Lehman said, it is always tough, even tougher in this seat than I thought it was when I was in your seat, to decide when you have enough information that a project is real and the process starts. But another thing I have learned, and in this process, starting late, late information to the public, to the Parks and Rec Advisory Board, to the school board, reduced the ability to have another option. And I think while a lot of people can say this is about problem solving and combining a creative way to meet all the various needs, I say it may be about, it's not solely about, but it may also be about the way the public's business is done in public. I proposed when I heard about this, at least from the city's viewpoint, that in the interest of not having to sacrifice designated natural area, that we look at selling, and Councilwoman Susan Shepherd asked this during the question period, we look at selling a parcel of land in my district very close to 1330 Fox at 14th and Alati. The information I got was that that would probably sell, maybe I shouldn't say it out loud, we're not selling it though, but it would probably sell for around $2 million. This council, maybe 2 months ago, approved the sale of an orphan parcel in Cherry Creek for nearly $500,000. That gets us very close to the $3.2 million, well, really it's a $3.9 million purchase price of the Hentzell Park open space. The city and Rosandum Center was already willing to put in $705,000, so we're getting closer yet. And by the way, what we're putting in is coming out of a contingency fund that we protect. So I didn't see the dollars being so different, but by the time I knew enough to make some alternative suggestions and try to solve a problem, I was told I was 2 years too late. We know that traffic studies occurred in April and May, and that in June, the school board was being told the results of those studies, a cost on this. We don't know for sure whether they were told this was a swap. I heard in committee the information on it being natural area didn't occur till about July. That's, sorry, a little slow. We were able, I was in a very tight position about 5 years ago when there was a proposal from the administration to put a history center in Civic Center Park. And I remained open-minded to that, but we had enough time, even it wasn't a lot, but to set up a process, and we had discussions, and there was a compromise proposed, and I believe because that compromise didn't meet all of the history center's needs, and also because the public felt the way many of the people we heard from tonight, that the History Museum found another alternative. We just didn't have that chance now. I do want to say that I respect the Board of Education and the school administration's decision on whether a school is needed. I think it's so important that we bolster our schools. They've been becoming more popular. I think citywide we have more kids enrolled than ever, and I think that's really important to a vital school system. But as Vince Carroll said in his editorial, there'll always be demand on our open space. There will always be demand on it. And at the same time, and he said this too, every year Denver is becoming a denser and more vertical urban center, raising the civic value of every oasis of open space. If it's hard to find a different school site in Southeast Denver, where will we find future open space in Southeast Denver, even though they seem well endowed with that at this moment by numbers? And where, if and I think it's a long shot, a school weren't built on this land, where would we find the money to buy it back? Because that's our option. So tonight, it's hard to say I'm not going to support this swap, especially in light of the proclamation that we started our meeting with on child abuse. But I realize all of us are making hard decisions tonight. My vote in opposition to the transaction is a voice for the fact that transactions concerning public land and open space demand almost more than any other thing we do early and extensive, not late and exclusive public process. I think that's very important. Nearly everything else has been said. I could elaborate on the zoning, but you got your money's worth tonight in terms of sending us lots of emails and hearing our response. I think it has been a good debate.
Thank you, Councilwoman Robb. Councilwoman Lehman.
I would like to just take 1 minute to thank my fellow council people who have spent time reading your emails and talking to you on the phone, who have thought about this and discussed it. And as you can tell by the discussion, has spent a lot of time on this. And I think I'm really proud of the Denver City Council tonight. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Lehman. Well, as president, I get the privilege of having the last say, and often that's very difficult because of the eloquence of my fellow council members and their thoughtfulness. I do want to thank all of you for what was an excellent public hearing, very respectful, as I mentioned. I want to particularly thank the parents of that baby back there. That baby happens to be the youngest neighborhood activist that I have ever had the pleasure of having in the chambers. Really appreciate you staying this late and bringing that baby. And it shows how important the issue is to you, and it was obvious how important the issue is to everybody in here. I too am very proud of the people that I get a chance to work with. You could hear by their questions that they didn't take this issue lightly. They studied it hard. I mean, they are quoting chapter and verse of page 27, line 4 of the materials that we received, and certainly everybody listened to or read the emails, talked on the phones, and everybody in the room likes schools, and everybody in the room likes domestic violence centers, and what a very difficult decision it is to decide. You don't want to decide between one or the other. The decision, as many people said, was this location. And I think what we have here is as several people mentioned, we had a wonderful democratic process. Perhaps we could have studied a little longer. Timing is always something that's difficult to manage. But if it weren't for the people who were worried about our open space, it was those folks, you and us, who were the catalyst for one of the biggest operations that our Parks and Rec are going to take in terms of designating area they had not designated before. It really brought to the attention of all of us what we needed to do in the city. It is a very difficult decision, and it's a difficult decision for all of us, no matter how we come down on this. But I do believe that the good that will come out of this outweighs the difficulty and perhaps I don't want to say the bad, but the loss of the natural area, because I feel like we're going to get more than we're giving. So I too will be supporting this. And I thank my fellow council people for what was a prodigious effort in understanding this issue. Madam Secretary, roll call.
Lehman.
Aye.
Lopez.
Aye.
Montero.
Aye.
Nevitt.
Aye.
Ortega.
No.
Robb.
No.
Shepard.
No.
Brooks.
Aye.
Brown.
Aye.
Fotts.
Aye.
Herndon.
Aye.
Kenich.
Aye.
Ortega.
You want me to vote twice?
Your vote didn't show up.
Sorry.
Madam President.
Aye. I have all the votes in. Madam Secretary, please close the voting and announce the results.
10 ayes, 3 nays.
10 ayes, 3 nays. The bill's passed. Pre-adjournment.